Comic Geek Speak presents The Crisis Tapes, Episode 19, Crisis on Infinite Earths, Number 5, Part 1. Welcome back to the Crisis Tapes. My name is Peter.
And mine is Adam.
And we are back again to talk about Act 2 of Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Right. More or less unofficial, but also more or less official. Though those act divisions, that is, because Marv Wolfman admitted he wrote the work to fit into that scheme. So we are justified in saying Act 1, Act 2, roughly 4 issues each. So Here we are after our interlude last episode, ready to dive back into the text itself with issue 5, the beginning of Act 2.
And I think we should probably we'll do a little preamble, but we're going to try to jump right into the episode too, because this is a chunky issue.
Info dump.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on between the cover, between a double splash page, 5-6 pages in. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. We're here for an allotted time, and we're just gonna record and see how long it goes, and then most likely we have to come back.
Yep. So we're gonna be providing captions for a whole lot of cover mug shots here, and we're gonna play a game of DC Multiverse Where's Waldo, and a little story stuff in between, and then cutting out, just depending on what the state of our respective throats is. Personally, I have a cold, so if I sound a little bit huskier than usual, you'll know why. Plus, we've both got places to be later on this evening, but we'll just see what we wordy bitches, to coin a phrase, can accomplish here in the time we've got.
Well, a couple notes here. We did talk about this last episode. This year, December 6th of 2019, will be our 10-year anniversary. I just want to keep throwing that out there, so I think that's awesome. And also, for those of you who might be wondering why we didn't look at what's been affectionately called Crisis number 4.5, the Legends special that came out in the 90s, early 90s, I think. Right?
Late 90s.
Late 90s, okay. We're doing this in publishing chronology. We're not trying to fit in later stories that benefit from hindsight and have a different sort of mentality, to it. So we are skipping that issue purposely. We're not trying to do a 4.5. We're going right to 5, which is how I read it, and which is how, most people probably read it.
No, we've got a lot more contemporary, as in coeval, existing at the actual time of publication, companion texts we're going to need to talk about before we get anywhere near that Legend special.
Right. And then the only other thing is in our interlude episode, last episode, I mentioned that there was a homage cover to Crisis number 1 on the Betty Page Unbound number 2 issue by Scott Chandler from Dynamite. Did you order that? I can't remember if you said you ordered it.
I did not order that.
Well, you have a copy, sir, because here you go. Betty Page Unbound number 2. It's just the front cover. It's not a double cover. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different Betty Pages right in the same positions as many of our favorite characters from that first issue.
Yeah, many of them seem to be in the vein of Dynamite licensed characters, too. We've got Jungle Betty Page, Vampirella Betty Page, Wonder Woman meets the Bionic Woman Betty Page.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. Yeah.
And, Barbarian Betty Page and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
cool. There you go.
Did you pick this up, Peter?
I had 3 copies.
Oh, wow.
So one for me, one for you, and one extra for my collection. So.
All right. Well, thank you.
Sure. And there was another homage cover to issue number 7 that was on a title called the Cimmerian. I forget what company it was. They were doing Conan, basically. And they have since got the rights pulled, even though it didn't say Conan. I guess it was a little too close.
I'm guessing Cimmerian is probably also under trademark.
Yeah, right. And it was an issue 7. They had solicited an issue 7 homage cover to like their second issue or something like that. And of course, I was going to get it, but they've since pulled that. So I was like, can't add that to the collection. That's a shame.
Well, they may come back swinging with a new, less plagiaristic title.
So I think that's it. That's all everything I had for the top of the.
Okay.
If we ever get to like feedback, that may not be until like the second or third part of this book. So.
Just depending how long this ends up going. Because again, we've got a lot of footnoting to do here, folks.
That's right.
All right. And so I guess our first stop and the spot on which we're going to be spending the majority of the time in this episode. Now, just depending on how long this episode lasts, to get to that big double-page splash. I think you all, everyone listening knows what splash we're talking about on pages 7 and 8. That's going to be pretty labor-intensive, too. But we're starting off with all those beautiful little monochromatic Parisian headshots that make up the kind of a mosaic on the front cover of issue number 5. And some of the other issues, most of them so far, the covers have been pretty cut and dried. But this is a cover you can really sink your teeth into.
Right. And I just have a couple of notes right off the bat. I think, because otherwise I'll keep saying it for every headshot, it is amazing how Perez is able to be so specific on people who don't have masks, who don't have some kind of face paint, or, maybe they don't have the Dreamgirls mold or anything like that. It's just a face. And you can really, if you know your DC history, you can see who everybody is. And I think it's a testament to his art. It's a testament to his craft, to his passion for this series. It is quite amazing. There are certain clues here and there for those people. If there's like a face, you're like, oh, I wonder who that is. There are clues here and there. But I just had to get that out of the way because I just think it's amazing how specific this is.
Yes, it's just... It's catnip to geeks like us.
Yes.
It's to just get in there, use our geeky detective skills. But yes, you're absolutely right. Perez does a great job of laying down the artistic breadcrumbs for us to follow.
Right. And if you have certain collections, some of these characters get cut off, especially the right-hand side. There's some images where there's a whole row that you don't see. So the best sort of example of this image is from the issue itself, or if you can find it online, because some of, like, you're looking in the hardcover, right?
Yes, I am. There's no pesky UPC code down there. No issue number box up in the upper right.
But see how, like, even on the bottom row, some of the faces are starting to cut off there?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, the original issue is better for that.
Yeah.
That bottom row.
So you have to be careful about your images. I always say go back to the issue itself, the print issue from 1985, and that's where you can really see a lot of the faces, other than the ones that are being covered.
Yep. Just now, one of the ones you're going to be talking about, all the way down here in the lower left corner. I didn't even know that one was there.
Yeah.
This moment is the first time I even noticed that character down there because he's under the UPC code.
That's right. So we divvied it up. I will be taking the left side, which is all the Earth 1 characters.
Mm-hmm.
Adam will be taking the right side, which is all the Earth 2 characters.
Yes, Peter was a sport and let me choose which Earth.
I knew you were going to pick that one.
Yeah.
There are 96 characters on here. I counted it twice. Hopefully I'm right. Unfortunately, Adam does have more than I do.
Which surprises the heck out of me. I would
Right?
have thought there would have been fewer Earth 2 characters to even put on there.
Yeah. And what we're gonna do is just go row by row, and we should probably go like in row 1, I'll do the first half, and then you do the second half. Then we'll go to row 2. I'll do the first half, you do the second half. That way, our voices are bouncing.
Typewriter style, left to right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That sounds good. Anything else you want to say though about the issue first? I mean, the cover.
Yeah, well, maybe just to follow up on what I just said about how surprised I am that there were so many Earth 2 characters on here. When you consider, I mean, this is celebrating DC's 50-year history. Earth 2, I mean, the published canon of Earth 2 really only covers, like, the golden age of comics, like from 1935, in the case of, like, really early characters like Dr. Occult, up to 38, and all the way through arguably the mid-50s. And then we jump over to Earth 1. So for maybe a little over 15 years, like 16, 17, 18 years, versus what would be like 32 years of Earth 1 stories. I mean, granted, there were some Earth 2 stories thrown in there later on. But yeah, it's just kind of surprising how extensive the Earth 2 character catalog has become, and how Perez threw so many of them in there when there were surely so many more Earth 1 characters he should have sandwiched in there as well.
Right. That could have gotten the spotlight for sure. Yeah. So, you think that's it? That's enough. Should we jump in?
Yeah, there'll be other umbrella statements to be made as we go, but we'll just... Oh, you even printed yours out. I've just got my piece of 8x11 typing paper.
I got 14 pages of one-sided notes, my friend.
Yep.
Not just for the cover, but...
covered with crawling little gnats of ink. My handwriting.
I went crazy. Shall we start?
Let's do.
All right. I'll read all the names and I'll give my notes. So we have from left to right on the Earth 1 side. We have Red Tornado. If you want to be specific, Red Tornado 2, Scalp Hunter, Wildfire, Halo, and then Barry Allen Flash. And so here are some of my notes about them. I think here's a superficial overview note. I think it's really interesting that a lot of these characters have a lot of duality to them. If you think of Red Tornado trying to find his humanity, Scalp Hunter is a man of two worlds, a white man who grew up in Indian culture. You could look at Wildfire being, again, someone who struggles with trying to find humanity. Halo was finding her origin out as this issue was going on over in Batman and the Outsiders. She is someone who finds out that she's actually an alien, right? Inhabiting a human body. And then, of course, you have Flash. And the only thing I really thought about Flash was Flash of Two Worlds.
So naturally, he and Jay Garrick are right there top center.
So those are some of like my superficial notes. Red Tornado has a very interesting place because he was someone who started off on Earth 2. He could have been on the other side, depending.
He just kind of crossed back and forth.
Right.
He was created on Earth 2 by a mad scientist from Earth 1.
Right. So I think that's great. I think that's really interesting that he has that sort of legacy to him. Going on right now in his life, he was in the middle of his 4-issue miniseries by Kurt Busiek and Carmine Infantino that took place before the Crisis. You can certainly tell that it's Red Tornado because of the arrow, because of the small eyes, which was something Perez did a lot for certain characters. Let's see. And then it's interesting to note, we'll talk about him later, but the Crisis, of all the characters, this is definitely a character that got really affected by the Crisis, as we're going to find out in this issue and in future issues. So... Scalp Hunter, Brian Savage, Kiwanote, he who is less than human. As I said, a man who lived in two worlds, but was at home in neither. He's been around since 1977. We've seen him in Crisis number 3, and at that point he was a contemporary of like Jonah Hex and Batlash. He hadn't appeared much in the DC universe prior to the Crisis. A Brave and the Bold issue, an issue of Justice League of America, but spent most of his continuity in weird Western tales, and he once arm wrestled President Lincoln.
Couldn't resist throwing that in.
No. Wildfire, that full-face visor and that helmet protrusion on the top of his head, that's how you know who he is. Been around since 1973. In many ways, very similar to Red Tornado. He was a human being who had an accident and then became composed of antimatter energy or anti-energy.
Oh, well.
Which that's going to come up later. Not directly, but I think there are some things that we can pull out of, like, say, issue number 7, when they actually go to Quard and why he's there, and et cetera. Yep. So,
example of a character who could have been used in a deeper way.
Right. He's a member of the Legion of Superheroes of the 30th century and has been seen in the Crisis to this point. Next up, Halo, Gabriel Doe, a member of the Batman and the Outsiders. She's been around only for about 2 years now in the DC universe, but she did appear previously in the Crisis. You can tell it's Halo because, well, number one, she has a halo around her, and number two, she has little streaks in the left side of her hair, which was the design of her costume.
Harder to tell in monochrome, of course, but
right.
Just the line work there from Perez gives the impression of the streaks.
Yeah, very, very delineated in there. And then Barry Allen Flash. I mean, come on, his cowl is a giveaway. He is the embodiment of Silver Age DC universe.
Mm-hmm.
He is one of the main sacrifices of the Crisis, and he has been floating around in the Crisis up to now as well. So there you go. That's all I have. Anything to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
And bumping it across the axis of symmetry there, going down the middle, sort of like the Star Trek mirror dividing line there. We get the Flash of Earth 2. And before I reel off everybody in the right-hand side of row 1, those two characters together, they had to be at the top center of this mosaic of two Earths, because they are the first multiversal crossover. Those two characters together are emblematic of the origin of the multiverse as it became. I mean, there were other parallel Earth stories in DC Comics prior to Flash number 123, but that was really what kicked off the multiversal structure that was being abolished by this story, the one that's really understood most as the multiverse. So it's good that we've got those two together. That's Jay Garrick, of course, the Earth 2 Flash. First appeared in Flash Comics number 1, 1940. He was a grad student who inhaled hard water fumes overnight and ended up acquiring super speed powers. It's a slightly better way of going about doing that than an injection of mongoose blood, say, like certain other Golden Age speedsters had to resort to. So he's a founding member of the JSA. He's been around almost as long as superheroes have been around. And he's like the beloved grandfather, ambassador between generations, between the Golden Age heroes and the generations that followed. And he's the first character a lot of people think of when they hear Earth 2. So there he is. Now the rest of the row here, of row 1 and what we'll also call row 1A, because Perez sneakily put a few extra heroes in, or characters in, to fill the interstices between rows here and there. So next to Jay Garrick, we've got Johnny, Jonni, Thunder. Next to her is Amazing Man. And then the Golden Age Cheetah, the Cheetah of Earth 2. Then Solomon Grundy. And then on the far right-hand margin, we've got Dr. Midnight. And then the three heads underneath Amazing Man, Cheetah, Grundy, and Midnight are Brainwave Jr., the Paul Kirk version of Manhunter, and Fog of Night and Fog. All right, so Johnny Thunder. You talked about the duality of the characters on your half of this row, Peter. I'm going to take this opportunity to point out something I'll be pointing out several more times as we go through here. The duality of citizenship that a lot of these characters arguably have between Earths, or at least the duality of existence. Like you could argue that some of these characters maybe had little known and seldom seen Earth 1 counterparts that were just quickly swept under the rug with Crisis and didn't actually get death scenes in this series, for example. And there's even some dispute in some cases as to which Earth some of these characters really belong. Johnny Thunder, Jonni, she is a recent introduction to the DC Universe at this time. She had been around for about a year. She was debuted in a 4-issue miniseries written by Roy Thomas, character co-created by Jerry Conway. The two of them cooked her up while they were living out in California together, trying to work in pictures. Which partly explains why her adventures were set in L.A. She had the artwork was done by Dick Giordano, I believe. I just read that miniseries not too long ago and talked about it on the Time Bubble.
Cool.
So she was a private investigator. She wore a trademark white suit with a black shirt and a white necktie. And yeah, she was certainly not a girly girl by any stretch of the imagination. She worked against certain stereotypes about women in comics to that point. And she was just a detective who managed to acquire superpowers. That's why her miniseries was subtitled AKA Thunderbolt, because she got from an enchanted statue that her father, a private investigator who was recently deceased, had turned into a lamp to decorate his office. So it's when this energy being comes to live in Johnny's body, it's kind of like letting a genie out of a lamp. Yeah, so there wasn't really much in that first 4-issue miniseries to let you know in which universe she resided. Being that it was created by Roy Thomas, I think everyone just kind of assumed she would be an Earth 2 character. And eventually, once all this Crisis stuff blew over, when Earth 1, Earth 2 boundaries didn't matter so much anymore, she did become a supporting cast member of Roy Thomas's ongoing Infinity Inc. series. and she and Star Spangled Kid had kind of a romance going on. But apparently it was assumed by the creators of Crisis here that she was, even before Crisis, an Earth 2 character. Maybe just because, again, of the identity of her creator-writer, Roy Thomas, Mr. Earth 2. And speaking of Mr. Earth 2, the next character was also created by him. This is Amazing Man, not to be confused with the Golden Age hero from Centaur Publications, also called Amazing Man, alias John Aman, who was created by Golden Age great Bill Everett. Instead, what we have is a DC Universe character named Amazing Man who is named Will Everett. This is a thing I didn't even realize until I did a little bit of background research here, that he was named after that creator. He is not... as Amazing Man, he is not an authentic Golden Age character. I think I do remember reading some little bit in a letters column of All-Star Squadron that Roy Thomas based him on like a very bit-passing character that maybe appeared in Action Comics number 21, which was the origin point, like the seed for a lot of stories that Roy Thomas spun in All-Star Squadron. Like maybe he was the janitor for an atomic scientist named Terry Curtis, who was captured by Ultra Humanite and turned into an atomic-powered villain, reluctant villain, called Cyclotron. And he also did something to Will Everett, the janitor, in Dr. Curtis's lab to give him matter-mimicking powers, basically absorbing man powers from Marvel.
Right.
He could assume the properties of any substance he touched. Later, those powers changed, and he got electromagnetic powers instead. But yeah, he was a fairly important member of the All-Star Squadron, despite not being, for the most part, an authentic Golden Age character. I think Roy said he maybe turned a very small supporting role from maybe that Action Comics issue into this superpowered African-American hero for World War II. And so, yeah, that's pretty much Roy's brainchild. Then we have the Cheetah. This is the Earth 2 Golden Age Cheetah. This is debutante Priscilla Rich, who was insanely jealous of Wonder Woman and developed a split personality, who was a predatory criminal who was more obsessed with getting than having. I mean, she was already wealthy, but she just wanted not just the acquisition of more loot, she wanted the attention that being a costume criminal would get her. And she embodied certain of... she fit into that weird philosophy that William Moulton Marston was putting forth about the virtues of womanhood and loving submission to authority and all that whole ideology of his. Yeah, she represented certain negative traits that he perceived in womanhood, and she is one of several of the Earth 2 Golden Age Wonder Woman foes who ended up on Reformation Island. She also apparently had an Earth 1 equivalent who also put on a cheetah costume and fought the Earth 1 Wonder Woman because... in 1980, in Wonder Woman number 274, we saw a version of Priscilla Rich, the cheetah, dying and passing the information about her life of crime on to her niece, Debbie Domain, who was then brainwashed by Cobra into becoming a new Earth 1 cheetah. So this is another one of those Earth-straddling characters who arguably has had a life on both Earths, whether it's the same person having that life on, traveling between Earths, or just... different beings originating on different Earths. It's hard to say, but I would guess that in Priscilla Rich's case, she had an Earth 1 equivalent who just died. And here's the Earth 2 version. And next to her is that classic white-skinned swamp creature, Solomon Grundy. He's been around for a good long time. He's still looms very large in DC Universe. He first appeared in All-American number 61 back in 1944. He's mainly a Golden Age Green Lantern villain. He also fought the Golden Age Flash and a bunch of others. He was the corpse of businessman Cyrus Gold, who was murdered in Slaughter Swamp, which is located by a lot of writers outside of Gotham City, which helps him sort of incorporate himself into Batman's rogues gallery as well. And that corpse mutated into this hulking, somewhat sentient swamp creature who was made partly of plant matter, which made him invulnerable to Golden Age Green Lantern Alan Scott's power ring, which didn't work against wood. So yeah, he menaced various DC Golden Age heroes and continued to do so to this day. And another fun fact, which also came up on my last time bubble, I believe, there was an Earth 1 Solomon Grundy for a while there in the 70s. He was created by the Parasite, as a foe for Superman. He is actually stronger than the Earth 2 Grundy, and almost just about as strong as Superman. He was basically created as a cheap way of slipping the Hulk into the DC universe as a foe for Superman. Just answering those questions about whether Superman could beat the Hulk or not. That's basically what the Earth 1 Grundy was about. So there's...
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say he's celebrating 75 years this year.
That's true.
Publishing continuity.
Yeah. His first appearance was in October of 44.
Yeah.
So fitting, because that probably came out in October, because I don't think they advanced dated the books in those days. And then we have Dr. Midnight on the far right margin there. You can tell by those funky goggles he's wearing. He's a Golden Age hero, not a founding member of the JSA. He didn't join until All-Star number 8, same time as Starman. He first appeared in All-American number 60. All-American number 25. Yeah, so he 41. He was a noted surgeon who was operating on someone who had been shot while preparing to testify against the mob, and then the same mobsters that tried to kill that guy tried to finish the job by tossing a grenade into the operating room, which damaged Dr. Charles McNider's optic nerves in a very specific way, so that now his eyes only worked in darkness. So he set himself up with those dark glasses, invented his trademark blackout bombs, and went to town as a foe of organized crime everywhere. Just a surgeon wielding a scalpel on the disease of crime. Yeah, so he's a longtime JSA or two, although, as I said, not a founding member. And now in the middle row there, we've got 3 more characters to talk about. The glasses and headband there between Amazing Man and Cheetah, that's Brainwave Jr., this is one of the members of Roy Thomas's second-generation Earth 2 hero group, Infinity Inc. Roy Thomas's own creation. He first appeared, like most of the membership of Infinity, in All-Star Squadron number 25. And he is the son of the Golden Age villain and foe of the JSA, Brainwave. His real name was Henry King, so Brainwave Jr.'s real name is Henry Hank King Jr., and he has mental powers comparable to and actually greater than his father's, all the more so because when his father died early in Infinity Inc.'s run, he passed his mental powers on to his son to add to Hank Jr.'s own mental power. So he's now twice as powerful as a result of that. And he had kind of a romance going on with his teammate Jade. Then next to him, a character with kind of a naughty history, because there have been so many different characters to use this name, and there have been a number of different texts to play on that. But we're talking about the Paul Kirk, and I have to put quotes around that, version of Manhunter, because there was, in the early days of the DC's Golden Age, a different Manhunter named Paul Kirk. The original first appeared in Adventure Comics number 58 in 1941, and he was basically just a plainclothes private detective who helped the police out on various cases to try to track down criminals. Then there was kind of a reboot done by Simon and Kirby, and that version first appeared in 1973. His name was given as Rick Nelson, so the costumed Manhunter, the one with the red suit and the blue face mask, which is what we see on the front of the cover here. That was supposed to be a different character originally, but some editor decided to switch the name over to Paul Kirk to match the old plainclothes private eye. But it's a completely different character with a different backstory. This Paul Kirk was a big game hunter who decided to hunt criminals instead. And Kirby put this costume on him, and his career just kind of went forward from there. And about the same time, there was a character called Manhunter, whose secret ID was Donald Dan Richards, who was being published at Quality Comics. So there are 2 Golden Age Manhunters. They both ended up in DC's character library. But that Manhunter does not appear on here because, well, I guess arguably, thanks to Roy Thomas and his work in All-Star Squadron, all Quality Comics or Earth X characters were originally Earth 2 characters. But this cover, with 1 or 2 important exceptions, as we'll see when we get to the bottom, only gives us the OG Earth 2 characters, the ones that actually appeared in All-American or National Periodical Publications comics. And then, there in the corner, sandwiched in between Grundy and Dr. Midnight with...
Is Dr. Octopus.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it past Perez to slip in something like that. Just He's an Earth 2 resident, too. Who knew? No, that's Fog of Night and Fog. This is another totally original Roy Thomas creation. First appeared in All-Star Squadron number 44, April of 85, so just 4 months before this issue went to press. That is when Fog and his sister Night and Fog together, made their first appearance. They get their name from the Night and Fog, or in German, Nacht und Nebel program of suppression and terror that Hitler put in place. It's a way of getting his SS to go out and disappear dissidents within the Nazi-controlled territories. But these two human agents, named Night and Fog, they're a brother-sister team. Night has the ability to project pure blackness from her hair, which deadens all of the senses of people trapped within it. And Fog can control its own density and turn into like a cloud, basically. And the two of them together are responsible for murdering the father of Danette Riley, who appears right below Fog's head there on this cover. So that's a little awkward. Yep. So they assassinated Emerald Ed Riley, a steel tycoon who was Firebrand's father. So there we go. Back to you and back to Earth 1, Peter.
All right. One of the things I just want to quick throw out there is we're purposely not giving too much information post-crisis on these characters because we're really dealing with who they are up to this point.
Right.
So we might slip some things in here and there, but for the most part, we're not trying to let you know, oh, guess what? They're showing up now somewhere, you know?
Yes, because that will double the length of these recaps.
Right. All right, so now we jump to line 2. We're back to Earth 1, and this line 2 for me, I'm calling, I'm giving it's a lot of orphans and a lot of aliens and a lot of soul survivors, and I'm going to do just the heads. I'm not going to do the heads below because I'm going to save that for my next line for a thought I have about all those characters. So I'm going to focus on Dawnstar, Martian Manhunter, Batman, Firestorm, and Superman. So I'm just going to name those for this line. And we've seen Dawnstar, we've seen Firestorm. They are both part of what we used to call the Great 15 in a lot of our early episodes. They were the ones that were in issue 1 of Crisis. They were pulled from their various timelines, from their various Earths by the Monitor, by Harbinger, really, in The Summoning, as that issue was called. They were the first ones to really figure out what, or be told what was going on. So that's why we call them the Great 15. So both Dawnstar and Firestorm were part of that. We've seen Dawnstar since issue 1. You know it's Dawnstar. She has that amulet thing on her forehead, which interestingly, when she was first given it, it was just a rounded gemstone that just had an effect to it, like it would shine, right? But since then, a lot of artists draw it as this little star symbol, like it's actually the symbol posted on her forehead.
See, so it's really just it's supposed to be just a light effect.
Correct.
But now it's been drawn like a star-shaped piece of shiny metal.
Right, yeah. Almost like it was like a headband, right? But no, it was a backup tale drawn by Gene Colan in one of the Legion books, where she was to go on a quest out in space, and her parents gave her this little, it's almost like Raven's soul gem sort of thing. But since then, everybody pretty much just draws it, like you said, like an actual steel, like a belt buckle. So that's Dawnstar, member of the Legion of Superheroes. We've seen her around, and we will continue to see her throughout the Crisis. Next up, Martian Manhunter. I believe this is his first Crisis appearance. He is a character that has been around since 1955, and I think it's interesting to note that although the mark between Silver Age and Golden Age is always usually laid at the feet of Barry Allen Flash, you can argue that the Martian Manhunter stories that predated it are also very much the beginning of Earth 1 stories. And there are some other characters like, say, Captain Comet, which goes back to 1951. But really, it's that Showcase Presents number 4 Flash first appearance that is the mark of the Silver Age. but got to give Martian Manhunter his due as well.
Absolutely.
And he was hanging out with Justice League Detroit at this time. For a lot of his origin story, a lot of his publishing chronology, he was just like Superman. He had 1,000 different powers, depending on what story, what predicament he was in. Weakness to fire. But at this point, he was really pretty much kind of like a sole survivor of his planet, but not really, because there were many, many, many other Martians. I can't remember. Were they living on New Mars by this point, or I can't remember. If
by this point, yes.
Yeah,
I think they must have been. But I think he actually did still have relatives on Mars sometime between his first appearance and now.
Yeah.
And certainly there were white Martians and all that stuff.
Right. And you can tell it's him because of those very heavy brows. Again, you can hardly see his eyes, the bald head. So that's John Jones, Martian Manhunter. Next up, Batman. And all I have in my notes is, come on. As Batman.
Batman.
Batman. He's been around. He first popped up in Crisis 3. He's leading the Outsiders at this point. Funny enough, Perez's version of Batman is fantastic. Not my favorite. And I don't even think I would list him in my top 5 favorite Batman artists, because it's not like he had a lengthy run on the character.
Oh, no.
But I feel like he draws him in a very superhero way. And it's very iconic, but
doesn't really get to the heart of the character.
Right. That's a good way to put it. Yeah. I feel like there's other. My favorite is Jim Aparo. Some people
you and me both.
Yeah. Some people like Neil Adams, Marshall Rogers, Norm Brayfogle. Think of the ones that really had a lengthy career with Batman, which Perez never did outside of Justice League. So that's Batman. He's Batman. You should know who he is. Firestorm. We already mentioned he's one of the Great 15. He is a Jerry Conway co-creation. One of the younger members of the DC universe, and gets a lot of face time. In this series and on the covers. So much so that when I stopped at Firestorm, I said, I wonder who has had the most appearances on a Crisis cover. Because Firestorm is up there. He's got 5 appearances.
Well,
no. And most of the characters, outside of Harbinger, Anti-Monitor, Pariah, most that I've seen in my quick sort of research is most characters have 5. If they're on a lot of the covers, it's usually 5. But there's one character that has 7 appearances on covers. So this is my fun fact, my Crisis fun fact for the day.
Right.
Can you guess who would you think, outside of not Harbinger, not Alexander Luthor, not Pariah, one of the DCU characters has had 7 appearances on the Crisis covers? Who would it be?
And is it a member of the Super family?
It is.
Is it Superman?
Which Superman?
Is it Earth 2 Superman?
It is Earth 2 Superman. Has
Fitting.
7 appearances. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of cool. So as I was going through all these headshots, I went off on a tangent for a little bit and figured that out. Let's see. So that's Firestorm. And then we have Superman. In my notes, I said, see Batman. Same thing. You should know who he is. Not too focused on in this series to date. But the S-curl definitely gives it away. And if we're putting Flash at the top, certainly putting Superman close behind that or underneath it is certainly important.
Yeah. Just as an emblem of DC history and DC as a company altogether.
Right. And I'll look it up, but I did it for a few of the other dual characters between Earth 1 and Earth 2. I wanted to see, and maybe when was the delineation that we got Superman of Earth 1? It is a specific issue, but I can't remember what it is.
I can give you the first appearance of the Earth 2 Superman as the Earth 2 Superman. The first appearance of that character after it was established, there is a Golden Age Earth out there. And that was Justice League of America number 73.
Okay. I'll look up the Superman one because I know they give a very specific. Same thing with Batman. I think it's Detective Comics 327 or something.
Usually it's a retelling of the origin with significantly changed details.
Right. So that's it. Like I said, this is a lot of aliens. Dawnstar, John Jones, Superman. A lot of dual characters. Firestorm is a dual character again
Very much
because of
so.
Professor Stein. But also a lot of orphans and a lot of soul survivors. And I thought that was an interesting comparison there. So
Yeah, I'm glad that you're drawing these thematic threads through the characters you're talking about, Peter.
I have some fun ones coming up.
Yeah, I can't say that I went that extra mile myself, but yeah, it's a good way of trying to replicate Perez's thinking and how he decided where to put which heads
Right.
in which row and next to or on top of or around which other characters. It's good syntagmatic thinking.
Thank you.
So yes, then we cross over to Earth 2 Superman, we were just talking about a moment ago. Yeah, he too was a member of the Great 15. He was one of those summoned in the first issue of Crisis. And we've seen a good bit of him here. We're kind of using him to represent in this story the origin point of DC Comics publishing history, even though there were several years worth of content and several important characters introduced before him. It all somehow, one way or another, begins with Superman. That's a thread that Jeff Johns has picked up on in latter years. So he's Kal-El. That's just the letter L as opposed to the spelled out EL. That is Earth 1 counterpart favors. That's the way Earth 2 Kryptonians like to do it, or I guess residents of Krypton 2. And as we said, his first appearance as the Earth 2 Superman. I mean, technically it would be Action Comics #1, but his first appearance referred to as a Superman of a parallel Earth that is the home of Golden Age stories was Justice League, Volume 1, number 73. So moving on from him, everybody knows him. Psycho Pirate, a character that has become very symbolically associated with the Crisis narrative in the years to come. He's, by the time all is said and done, he's the only one that will remember that much of this stuff has happened. You can tell him instantly from his bichromatic Harlequin's cowl there, half red, half black. Real name, Roger Hayden. He first appeared in the Silver Age in Showcase number 55, which was a team-up between the Earth 2 Hour Man and Dr. Fate. And he has the distinction of being pretty much the first original Earth 2 character. He's a retread of an earlier Golden Age villain, a guy named Charlie Halstead, who just committed crimes based on emotions. Hayden is the second Psycho Pirate, and he has the power to influence people's emotions thanks to the magical Medusa masks, later collapsed down into a single mask. But he's the first Earth 2 character introduced in the Silver Age, who is not just a reintroduction of a Golden Age figure. He's a new character to assume an old mantle. So he's kind of like the first legacy hero on Earth 2, since Earth 2 became a thing. Next to him is Jim Corrigan, the soul of Jim Corrigan, elevated to the level of avenging spirit by the Presence, which is kind of like or the Voice, as he's sometimes also called, which is like an analog in the DC universe for the Judeo-Christian God. And he became the Spectre in his first appearance in never mind. It's more fun something. I don't have that written down, actually. Originally, he was just a ghost cop. He just went about his usual police work while also becoming the invisible and intangible Spectre when needed. But his power set kind of gradually expanded until when he was reintroduced in the 60s, he had attained godlike status. Powerful enough to straddle universes and even push parallel Earths apart, to wield heavenly spheres as bludgeons in battle with cosmic demons. You're going to see him flex his muscles in a big way by the time this story is over. And he does have kind of a little shadowy cameo inside this issue too. But until Crisis number 10, he doesn't really uncork. And then next to him, we have Johnny Quick of Earth 2, not to be confused with the Johnny Quick of Earth 3, who snuffed it in Crisis number 1, alongside his fellow members of the Crime Syndicate of America. The Earth 2 Johnny Quick is a real-life Golden Age character. His real name is John Chambers, and he was a reporter for the newsreel company Sees All Tells All News. He picked up a speed formula, and that's not a potable chemical formula. It's a mathematical formula, like an equation, which was conceived of by a Professor Gill. Roy Thomas, who loves to fill in these little blanks, later gave Professor Gill the first name of Ezra. And he entrusted this speed formula to John Chambers before he died. And so John Chambers, whenever he says or thinks or just concentrates on 3x2 9yz 4a, which is his speed formula, he gains the ability to go really fast. And he is even able to parlay that into flight, which is not something that a lot of other speedsters have been able to do. He also is noted for his hot temper. And he is an important member of Roy Thomas's All-Star Squadron. He had kind of a romance going on with Liberty Bell, and the two of them even got married. Next to him is another important figure in Roy Thomas's All-Star Squadron, and a creation of Roy Thomas as a kind of a legacy bearer of an existing Golden Age character. Her name is Firebrand. Firebrand 2, if you will. Her name is Danette Riley, and she is the sister of a more authentic Golden Age character, Rod Riley, who was Firebrand in Quality Comics of the 1940s. He appeared in that version of Firebrand appeared in 1940s issues of Police Comics. And later he became a member of the Freedom Fighters during their 1970s series and followed them to Earth-1, where he died in action. But since All-Star Squadron is set in the 40s, before any of that would have happened, Rod Riley is alive and well. He's just serving in the military. And his sister, Danette, back on the home front, was a volcanologist. She got mixed up with the All-Star Squadron during one of their first adventures. She got blasted by the sorcerer Wotan into a pit of synthetic lava, and in the process gained powers of heat generation. You know, she studied volcanoes, and now she basically was one. And she, too, is one of the first characters summoned or gathered. So she's part of the Great 15. And she had romantic relationships going on with a couple of her fellow All-Stars, both of whom appear on this cover, actually. And all the way to the right of her, then, is the Earth 2 Robot Man. Now, this is not to be confused with Cliff Steele of the Doom Patrol. That's the Earth 1 Robot Man. This is Earth 2 Robot Man, Golden Age character, who first appeared in Star Spangled Comics number 7 in 1942, created by Jerry Siegel, with artist Leo Nowak. Whom I'll have occasion to mention again closer to the bottom of this cover. And his deal was, he was originally a scientist named Dr. Robert Crane, whose body was terminally injured, and his brain had to be transferred into this robotic body he'd been working on by his faithful lab assistant, Chuck Grayson. I think via retcon, we later learned that he was a relative of the Earth 2 Dick Grayson, like a cousin or something. And he was then trapped in that robot body for a good long time. He became a member of the All-Star Squadron as well. He was kind of an important figure at the end of that run. He had an important role in the final fate of the Earth 2 continuity. As we know, when that series came to an end shortly after the Crisis had run its course, the Earth 2 versions of various heroes and villains still existed. Earth 2 itself still existed in 1942. That's because an evil robot from the future named Mechanique had done something to preserve that little patch of time-space. And Robot Man, in his turn, did his bit to preserve her from some justice that was going to be served out to her by his fellow heroes. So he's tied up to the Crisis, thanks to Roy Thomas in a pretty important way. He was also known as Paul Dennis. That was his human alter ego when he put on synthetic skin over his robot body. He's one of those DC characters, one of a handful, that actually outlasted the Golden Age in DC Comics. You know, you always hear about Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Green Arrow, Aquaman, but Robot Man also kept going. I don't know exactly how long, but I think about the middle of the decade, his adventures continued to appear in print in Detective, I think. And eventually we learn in a one of those DC Comics Presents Whatever Happened to Blank backup stories, which dug up old, forgotten characters and wrote a theoretical ending to their stories. Apparently he got a human body again in the person of his assistant Chuck Grayson, who put his brain into the robot in the first place. Chuck was dying of a terminal disease that would have killed his brain, but left his body intact, so he willed it to his old pal Dr. Bob Crane, and Robot Man became fully human once again. Yes, a lot of you probably know Robot Man from James Robinson's The Golden Age miniseries. He was prominently featured there.
Okay. A little addendum to my Superman. Looks like they're saying the Earth 1 Superman, he has a number of first appearances. One of them being Superman 46 in 1947, but only because it was a Superboy backup story. And if you have a Superboy story, technically that is an Earth One. That's an Earth One story because there was no Superboy for the Earth Two Superman.
Yep, that is a long-held truism.
Yeah. So, and then it goes from there. Like they say, Superman 78 and 52 because there was an adult Lana Lang. When Superman and Batman first appeared together in a later issue. There's no sort of like real clear-cut version of it, but
we can
several.
Yeah, E. Nelson Bridwell took care of the adult Lana Lang argument because in his Mr. and Mrs. Superman backup story in a series in Superman Family, he finally introduced an adult Earth 2 Lana Lang.
Oh, okay.
Revealing that there was, in fact, a Lana Lang who grew up with Earth 2 Clark Kent in Earth 2 Smallville.
There you go. All right, so let's jump to line 3. I will include those two that I skipped before. So we have Sergeant Rock, the new Dr. Light, the new female Dr. Light. And then if you go diagonal, that is Warlord, Travis Morgan. And then we come back down, and all you see is just some hair. That is Commandy, the last boy on Earth. And then you go back up again, diagonal between Batman and Firestorm. That is Blackhawk. And then come back down, the profile with the L, that is Lead of the Metal Men. And then we have Hawkman Katar Hall, Hawkman 2, I guess you could say, from the Justice League in the Silver Age. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, these characters, this line, this is my DC other genre line. We got war comics, we got fantasy comics, we got sword and sorcery, we have what I like to call Silver Age super science with the Metal Men, like a lot of those concepts that were real based on like science, but not science fiction, right? Like Metal Men, think of Doom Patrol. I'm sure there's some other ones. And then you can even throw Commandy as part of like the Kirby line or alternate future or just the Fourth World or even though he wasn't part of that Great Disaster, like just a whole little subset of like an imprint or a whole other line of titles within the DC universe. So that's sort of my overview of that line. What do you think of that? Does that work?
It works for me.
Okay.
Better than I could have come up with.
Sergeant Rock. So once again, we have further proof that scene in Crisis Number 3 that some annotators have labeled as being on Earth 2 when Sergeant Rock and company were trying to free Markovia during World War II, and they say, oh, well, that's Earth 2. No, it's Earth 1. Look, he's on the Earth 1 side.
Yep, that's pretty definitive right there. Plus, Markovia is an Earth 1 concept because Geoforce and the Outsiders are all on Earth 1.
That's right. That's right. In fact, in the first, in Batman and the Outsiders number 2, there is a flashback to Sergeant Rock in freeing Markovia, mixed in with the whole Baron Bedlam. Is that his name?
Yes.
Yeah.
Frederick Delam.
Yeah. Mixed in with his origin story there. So we have Sergeant Rock. He has, so he has his first appearance being in 1959. However, there were some stories where there were prototypes of this kind of character as early as 1958. The one that I see from GI Combat, I think it's like number 65. They don't name the character, but they say, oh, it's sort of like a prototype to him. But it's a very stern drill sergeant, but he's in the Marines, and Sergeant Rock is part of the Army. So, that's that. I couldn't really count that as his first appearance because it's just not the character. But one thing I do, we've seen him in the Crisis. We've seen him in a couple issue number 3, as I said, and number 4, and I think we'll see him again. One thing that's kind of interesting is DC had some other genres going on at this time: war books, westerns. Yep. You have Warlord. Sergeant Rock would continue for another 2 years after this issue, after, maybe even after the Crisis. He would go all the way to issue number 422.
Of his own series?
Title, yeah. In 1988 is when it actually came to an end.
Wow.
So I thought that was interesting because I used to collect Sergeant Rock, but then I dropped off, and I just assumed that those kind of titles went away after the Crisis. But no, he was around for a while, well into when the new DC universe was kind of being formed, right? So um, I think I don't want to say that it's like proof that DC wasn't. Some people say, oh, the Crisis, it just took away all these great titles. Well, Sergeant Rock was still around for a while, but that might be the only one. So,
Well, they did try to do something with Jonah Hex, but it wasn't. It wasn't a Western.
right. So I just thought that was cool. He had some legs after Crisis, which was kind of cool. Dr. Light number 2, the female Dr. Light. We talk extensively about her character in our coverage for issue number 4 in the 2 parts for issue number 4. So you can go back and listen to that. She will become central to the Crisis as we go on. She's involved with 2 high points, or one low point and one high point, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I wouldn't call her central exactly, but they gave her a couple of important things to do.
Right. I think she's like, if you think of like Monitor, Pariah, Harbinger, Alexander Luthor, Lady Quark, she's not maybe on that level. Like she would be like not feature, but like guest. Like she's
in terms of new characters created to advance the plot of the Crisis story, and then maybe have something to do in the DC universe afterwards.
Right. Okay, then let's jump to Warlord, because this is, I believe, possibly his first appearance in this series. You can tell it's him because of his metallic helmet and the mustache. You got to kind of like look a little close there to really see all of that. But he is a denizen of Skartaris, which, let's see, at this point, was it still being told that Skartaris was in the middle of the Earth, or did we know yet that it was like another dimension? I'm not quite sure yet how they listed it at this point.
I'm not sure either, but I'm leaning towards still geographically situated in the middle of the Earth.
Right. And we'll talk about him in the issue as well, because there's a couple things that I want to bring up about his character. He's been around since 1975. He's definitely a holdover to DC's other genres, like Sergeant Rock, and a pretty popular one in terms of integrating him into the DC universe after the Crisis. But, not a lot of their characters in horror, war, whatever, would go on to survive, but he did in one way or another. And even during this time, he would show up in some... Was he ever in DC Comics Presents? Maybe not. Trying to think if he ever crossed over, but
yeah, I ought to know that, but
yeah, and I didn't look it up. So
yeah, he's not a favorite character of mine. So that's probably one of those DCCP issues that I wouldn't be in a hurry to read once I bought. I would have just bought it and then shoved it into the pile.
Oh, that's funny. I loved his series only because of all that beautiful Mike Grell artwork. Almost all those issues had double-page spreads, which were amazing. And there was a run of OMAC backup tales that was going on for a number of those issues. So I seek out a lot of those Warlord stories. Then we go to Commandy, the Last Boy on Earth, created by Jack Kirby. He's been referenced as early as Crisis number 2. He's been around since 1972, so he's been even older than Warlord. He was seen, so he was someone who was... There's a lot of talk about the Great Disaster, does it fit into the DC continuity? And that's something the Crisis certainly tries to answer. And later, with the history of the DC Universe. So he was part of that whole Jack Kirby line, but he did have an appearance in Brave and the Bold. But you could say, Brave and the Bold is always looked at as kind of being on a different Earth. But then he also had an appearance on DC Comics Presents as well. And I feel like the Crisis really helped to solidify his presence within the DC universe, even though that's going to change by issue number 12. So, and you can just tell it's him by that sort of high blondish hair, poking up through the picture of that Earth there.
Yeah, I was all set to guess Black Canary actually, but but she's nowhere to be found on the cover, I don't believe.
No, I'd have to look at, maybe grab the Who's Who, and, well, no, that's because she's in a different costume there. Trying to think of what her hairstyle, how Perez usually draws her hairstyle. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right about this being Commandy, though.
Yeah. Then we have Black Hawk, possibly his first appearance as well. First appeared in Military Comics number 1, 1941. It's interesting that he's included on the Earth 1 side because there is a Black Hawk squadron of Earth 2, as we saw in All-Star Squadron.
Yep, and as we also saw in All-Star Squadron, they all ended up on Earth X, like all the other quality Origin characters. But I guess because the Blackhawks were one of the first quality properties that DC put to use once they bought that library near the beginning of the 50s, that established right off that there definitely were Blackhawks on Earth 1.
Right.
And they interacted with a couple of DC mainstream Earth 1 characters.
Yeah. I mean, it's curious that they show him. Well, I guess that we see him in his most used costume, with the hat and the. You have to imagine he's in those blue jumper suit flight jacket suits, and as opposed to the somewhat superhero costumes they got in the 50s.
Well, yeah, they're like the orange jumpsuits.
Yeah.
They had those going. And then when they actually became costumed superheroes, like Fab Super Freaks. Like one of them was the Listener and had little ears all over his costume.
Oh my God!
Yeah, that's and Batman accused them of this. He said that they just don't swing. Yeah, that's you might call those like the Earth 12 Blackhawks. Yeah, more on that later because this whole controversy comes up again when we get to Plastic Man down at the bottom of the cover.
Yes. And I put in my notes here. I so wanted to make an argument that it wasn't Black Hawk, that it was actually General Zod.
Well,
but you can clearly see he has black hair. He has black hair on the temples there.
And pre-crisis General Zod was bald. Yes,
right. But used to wear the same sort of helmet but his symbol on, not helmet, hat, pilot hat, but General Zod's symbol is just like a starburst or a sunburst. It doesn't have anything within the circle, whereas this one, that little emblem on the helmet clearly has a picture of like a bird or something on it. So I couldn't make the argument one way or the other. So it clearly is Black Hawk, although I will argue about another character later on. Then we get to Lead of the Metal Men, possibly his first appearance in the series. Metal Men, created by Robert Kanigher and Ross Andrew. Robert Kanigher is all over this cover, including Barry Allen. Let's see, Sergeant Rock, and other ones as I go. Certainly, you could even say the Earth One Wonder Woman.
Definitely.
And that led me on a tangent, although I didn't follow it this time. I wanted to know what creator created the most characters on this cover. I think someone over on the Earth 2 side probably will win.
That is a
if
deep
not
rabbit hole.
Gardner Fox or Julius Schwartz.
I was just going to bring up Gardner Fox, because he came up as the writer of a lot of the first appearances of the guys on the right-hand Earth 2 side.
Right. So I didn't go through that because it was already... These notes are already a lot. So I was like, I'll save that for another day.
Roy Thomas is probably in the running, too.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But I did have to give Kanigher his nod as well. And we'll talk more about him later. And then Hawkman, Katar Hall, who was last seen in issue number 4. This version of Hawkman created by Gardner Fox and Joe Kubert. This is the alien Katar Hall. This is another character that indirectly is affected by the crisis, as opposed to someone like Red Tornado, who was directly affected. Indirectly, I say indirectly because it was more the creators and the masterminds and the muckety-mucks of DC kind of screwed up Hawkman post-crisis. And it wasn't Hawkman's fault.
Not at all.
So it's a shame. It's a shame that became what that became. But that's really all I had for that. Yeah.
All right, then. On the Earth 2 side of the aisle, we've got Katar Hall's Earth 2 predecessor, Carter Hall. The Katar's name obviously being based on Carter Hall when he was revived for the Silver Age as part of that initiative at DC. So you probably know his deal. He's been kind of the dominant template of all Hawk activities at DC for the last 20 or so years. He's the archaeologist and Egyptologist who discovers that he's the reincarnation of an ancient Egyptian prince named Khufu. And that was the only reincarnation the character had as of 1985. All this stuff about his being repeatedly reincarnated over the years due to a curse, that didn't come on until much later. But so far as Carter knew at that time, he had only lived 2 lives as opposed to multiple. And the love of his life, Shaira Sanders Hall, his hawk girl, was originally the Egyptian princess Shaira. He first appeared in Flash Comics #1, 1940, alongside the Flash and a couple of other semi-important Golden Age characters. He's shown here in his wingless cowl with a picture of the eagle rampant on the front. And I'd always kind of assumed that had been introduced in the Silver Age to help differentiate him from the Earth 1 Thanagarian Hawkman. But as it turns out, he'd been wearing that head mask since 1948. It was introduced in Flash Comics. They even have the issue here. Flash Comics number 98 in August of that year. That had been around. That it was kind of convenient then when there were 2 different Hawkmen flapping around with similar-looking headdresses, and somewhat similar to. But to a lesser degree than what you were talking about, Qatar Hall's backstory being screwed up by Crisis and things that followed. Carter Hall's. He nearly got screwed up as well, because for a while there, the powers that be behind Crisis weren't sure whether or not Carter Hall would be able to survive Crisis. Like maybe he was a redundancy like the Earth 2 Superman or Wonder Woman, but eventually they decided they were different enough that they could both be allowed to continue to exist, especially since Carter Hall was immediately banished to Limbo in the last days of the JSA. And ultimately, Carter Hall ended up being the continuity placeholder that took Qatar Hall, the alien Hawkman's place in a lot of adventures that took place between the Golden Age and Hawkworld, the story that screwed up his backstory more than anything else. You can certainly make a case for that anyway. All right, moving across the rest of this line. Next to Carter Hall is probably my favorite character on this cover, because I think it's just so cool that Perez decided to throw him in here. You can't see any of his face. It's obscured behind Earth 2 itself, but it kind of looks like a big can of worms or a hen's nest. But it's actually yarn hair from the mask of a character called Ragdoll. This is a Golden Age villain. His real name was Peter Merkel, and he was... a lot of you out there probably know him best from the role that he was assigned in James Robinson's Starman series. He was kind of like a counterculture figure on the order of Chuck Manson. He was like a murder cult leader. But he started out as just a costumed thief. I mean, he was like a carnival contortionist turned very flexible thief. He came up with the gimmick of dressing himself up in a giant doll costume to get himself smuggled into various department stores and things so he could loot them afterwards. At one point, he gave himself as a gift to a young heiress from one of her many suitors and then robbed her mansion. So that was kind of his shtick during his one, and this is the funny thing here, his one Golden Age appearance. A lot of these figures that were resurrected by enterprising and history-minded writers of the Silver, Bronze, or Copper Ages, or afterwards, we would come to think of these characters that they revived as important Golden Age figures just because they've been used so much in latter-day stories. But Ragdoll only appeared once in the actual Golden Age, Flash Comics number 36. Carrie Bates brought him back in Flash number 229, and then Jerry Conway and somebody named George Perez picked up on him and used him as a part of the Ultra-Humanites Bi-Terrestrial Secret Society of Supervillains membership. He threw together a bunch of criminals from Earth 1 and Earth 2 to take on the JLA and JSA together. That was in Justice League of America number 195 through 197 in 1981. And the Ragdoll just kind of became a household name from there. He's got kind of pretty distinctive visual. He looks like he's wearing a big green onesie. He's like an evil Raggedy Andy doll come to life, which is creepy enough as it is. But then Robinson came along and took him that extra mile in the late 90s and turned him into, Charlie Manson in a Raggedy Andy mask. Yes, and he ended up siring a couple of progeny. So the legacy of the Ragdoll continues in DC to this day. I mean, he even showed up on The Flash live-action series this year. But I'm thinking it's probably because Perez drew Ragdoll in that Justice League arc with the Ultra-Humanite that he ended up on this cover. I can say the same thing about the monocle a couple of rows later on. Next to Ragdoll's messy head is the Star-Spangled Cowl of the Star-Spangled Kid. An authentic Golden Age character. His real name is Sylvester John Pemberton Jr. He was a young, a wealthy heir who had a strong sense of patriotism. And he formed a partnership with his chauffeur, Pat Dugan, who put on a striped shirt and took on the name of Stripesy. So they were like the American flag come to life. And they were constantly bickering over which one was the hero and which the sidekick. Although I think the consensus among most of the readership was that the Star-Spangled Kid was the hero because he was richer and smarter. But yeah, so he was like the only kid hero to have an adult sidekick. He's kind of an important figure in bridging the gap between Golden Age history and latter, because he and the rest of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, the super team to which he belonged, he was not a Golden Age member of the Justice Society. He just belonged to the Seven Soldiers. It was revealed in Justice League of America number 100 and 101 that the Seven Soldiers of Victory had been scattered throughout time and space in a battle with a villain called the Nebula Man, and the JLA and JSA had to split into teams and go to these different time eras to rescue all of them. And so the Star-Spangled Kid was brought back to the 70s, just as young and vital as he was back in the 40s. So he was kind of a man out of time. He was like 40s nostalgia come to life at that point. So he became part of a group of younger heroes that formed a youth annex of the Justice Society of America called the Super Squad. The name so generic, even the characters in Ben Stiller's Mystery Men didn't want it. But, yeah, these young JSAers did. So Star-Spangled Kid, the Earth 2 Robin, and Power Girl, they became collectively the Super Squad in the revived All-Star Comics number 58 in 1976. He was originally created by Jerry Siegel and artist Hal Sherman, and he went on to become like the patron of Infinity Inc., since he was kind of like straddling the generations of Golden Age characters before Infinity Inc. came along. So he took a shine to them and took them under his wing and became like their financier and their leader. He changed his name to Skyman eventually. That would happen not long after this. And he would ultimately be accidentally killed in battle with Solomon Grundy and the Helix in Infinity Inc. But as of Crisis, he's alive and well, and he's still in his Golden Age costume. He was kind of a legacy bearer in that, in starting with All-Star Comics number 58, he took on the cosmic rod of the Golden Age Starman. Ultimately, it was adapted into a belt for him, his cosmic belt. And he would continue to wear that to defy gravity, because in the Golden Age, he had no superpowers. But thanks to Ted Knight, he eventually acquired some superpowers. This is not something that James Robinson made up in Starman later on. This was Bronze Age continuity based on Golden Age characters. Next to him is another Infinity Inc. member, Fury, and one of the very few Infinity Inc. members that did not first appear in All-Stars Squadron number 25. She predated that by a little bit. She first appeared as the daughter of the Earth 2 Wonder Woman in Wonder Woman number 300, which is a story in which the Earth 1 Wonder Woman visited Earth 2 to just gab with her cross-universe sister, the Earth 2 Diana. And where she was revealed that she had married the Earth 2 Steve Trevor and had a daughter, and her name was Hippolyta Trevor. And that's who we're seeing here on this cover with the long yellow hair and the headdress, the Scarlet Witch-like headdress with the big gemstone in the middle. And she was half Amazon, so she had the kind of the typical Amazonian powers you might expect. And she also had a little pet Kanga, whom she called Trouble. Appropriate. And she was a founding Infinity Inc. member, a founding Infinitor, and the love of her life was, of course, Hector Hall, the Silver Scarab. We'll talk about it at the bottom of the cover. Next to her is Dr. Fate, a mainstay of the DC Universe for a long, long time. He first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 back in 1940, created by Gardner Fox and artist Howard Sherman. Fun fact here, he apparently no backstory was given for him for like the first year of his stories. Okay, we didn't know that his secret identity was Kent Nelson for about a year. So he was very mysterious at the beginning. He had that full face helmet. At some point in the Golden Age, he got like a cut off half helmet that made him a little more personable and human. And his magic powers were diminished somewhat too, but they re-increased as we moved forward into the Bronze Age. and he became a powerful sorcerer. He had a backup series in The Flash there at the beginning of the 80s, written by Martin Pascoe with some help from Steve Gerber. And I think it was about that time that the Lords of Chaos and Order became a factor in his backstory, as he was given his powers by a powerful alien wizard named Nabu the Wise. And I think we eventually learned that instead of just being a giant alien from the planet Cilia, Nabu was a Lord of Order, locked in a never-ending struggle against a rival group of godlike beings called the Lords of Chaos. And Dr. Fate, much later, we learned that he was supposed to be a force of balance between the two, but Nabu was kind of grooming him to be on the side of order. But much of that is not yet known as of 1985. He will take up a somewhat important role in the post-crisis DC universe. That even now, in the pre-crisis multiverse, he is one of the most powerful wielders of magic known to DC's readership. And next to him is a big-time Golden Age baddie with a Copper Age makeover. That is the Ultra Humanite. He is thought by some to be Superman's first major villain back in the Golden Age. He first appeared in Action Comics number 13, about 1 year after Superman himself. Originally, he was just like a frail, bald or balding, depending on who was drawing him, mad scientist who was confined to a wheelchair. He just had a criminal super brain enhanced by certain experiments he'd performed on himself. He made a few appearances in that form, and then he ended up being killed by one of his own death rays after Superman pushed him in front of it. See, this is the Golden Age, folks. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows and war bond rallies. It was... Heroes killed people sometimes, even Superman. So that happened, but his brain was able to be saved, and this kind of became his signature move after a while. He had it transferred into the body of... And at the time, I don't think we got much insight as to why he chose this person as the recipient of his brain, but he kidnapped film star Dolores Winters, a beautiful actress in Action Comics number 20, and had his brain transferred into her body. And then she appeared again the following issue in Action number 21. That's when we get Dr. Terry Curtis, whom Roy Thomas picked up on for his for his All-Star Squadron run and turned into the atomic villain Cyclotron. An Amazing Man also spun out of that, and eventually Nuklon spun out of that, and just... Roy Thomas really liked Action Comics number 21. But that was an Ultra Humanite story, and it was the last one for a good long time. For the creators of the Superman comics became more interested in Luthor. He didn't come back again, really, until E. Nelson Bridwell picked him up for his Mr. and Mrs. Earth 2 Superman backup series in Superman Family in the early 80s. That's when he came back as Dolores Winters, and then he had his brain transferred into the body of a giant flying ant for a little bit. And then it was, again, Conway and some guy named George Perez gave him the mutant albino ape body that is pictured here at the far right side of row 3 on this cover. So that was in Justice League of America number 195, and that was the first time we saw Ultra Humanite in what has become his most well-known, I would say, physical form. Shortly after Crisis, in an issue of Young All-Stars, Roy Thomas had him put his brain into the body of a Tyrannosaurus, but that didn't stick, apparently. That mutant albino ape was just too striking a visual, and it should be because Perez designed it. All right. Back to Earth 1.
Back to Earth 1. Shorter row here. We have Nightwing, Blue Devil, and Wonder Woman of Earth 1. Nightwing.
What do you have to say about Nightwing, Peter?
I could do a whole podcast on Nightwing.
I know you could.
Right? But Nightwing, not Dick Grayson, but Nightwing was created by Marv Wolfman and George Perez. We have, and he was first appeared in 1984 during the Judas Contract. Blue Devil, interesting to note that Blue Devil actually made his first appearance 1 month prior to Nightwing, so he's actually older than Nightwing as a character, which I always think of these sort of mid-'80s characters that can kind of skirt the line between pre- and post-crisis. Blue Devil's one of them. Booster Gold is another, or not Booster Gold. Blue Devil. Nightwing is another one. Who's the other? There's another one I was thinking too. I don't think he's on the cover. I'll have to think about who that is.
Just about anybody from Justice League Detroit.
Justice League Detroit, right? Yeah, Vibe, Steel, although Steel has kind of like a legacy already.
True. Yeah, and Vixen had appeared a few years earlier.
Yeah. But, Blue Devil getting his own title, that survived, that's kind of cool. And a character that survived, too. So, So Blue Devil, first created by Dan Mishkin, Gary Cohn, who is a BGSU alum, and Mr. Paris Cullins. Gary Cohn is credited as character and visual. Paris Cullins, who was the artist, is credited for his belt design.
That's it, huh?
That's it. That's very specific, right?
Well, didn't know Gary Cohn was that much into art.
Yeah. But you can tell it's Blue Devil because of the horns, because of the
spiky metal Van Dyke.
Yeah, is that what it's called? Yeah, Van Dyke.
I guess goatee. I guess
Goatee,
because Van Dyke goes all the way around the mouth,
right,
with a mustache.
Nightwing, you can tell it's Nightwing because of his mask. Also interesting that Nightwing, Dick Grayson's head is small. It's kind of tiny. He's got a tiny head compared to other male characters.
In fairness, Blue Devil's supposed to be physically larger because it's a human body encased in what was once a mechanical shell. So he would have a larger head than the average human being.
Yeah, but Perez was very good about showing Dick as being smaller. Like really only I think on Who's Who he's about 5'10". So he's not one of these 6'3" characters like Superman or Batman or whatever. And Starfire was usually taller than him as well. So I kind of like that he's slight. I mean, look at Supergirl's head. He's not even as big as Supergirl down there.
Oh, yep. 5'10", according to
5'10",
the original volume here.
There you go. And then we go to Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman Earth 1, who if you want to talk about the Earth 1 first appearance, that is Wonder Woman issue number 98 from 1958 by Robert Kanigher, pencils by Ross Andrew. Pretty much the delineation between Earth 1 and Earth 2 is if Harry Peters, who was one of the co-creators, if Harry Peters drew the comic of Wonder Woman, that is Earth 2. And if it's not Harry Peters, that after his run, then it's Earth 1.
I like that rule of thumb.
Yeah. And I have a note about why I think Wonder Woman is in the middle here, which you actually talked about way back in, let's see, where's my notes here? In one of the, Crisis Tapes number 4, when we did, that was entitled On Infinite Earths. That's when we talked about the multiverse of the DCU. And you already mentioned, too, about how Flash of Two Worlds is kind of like the delineation line or the main point. But there were stories before that, most notably in Wonder Woman. And if you go back to, as you talked about in that episode, Wonder Woman 59 from May-June of 1953, Wonder Woman's Invisible Twin, which I just reread again just to laugh. She crosses over into a world where there is a Wonder Woman. But that Wonder Woman is called Princess Tara Teruno. Earth must have a twin world existing simultaneously alongside it, but developing differently, and everyone on it is a double of everyone on Earth. This proves that evil will always be challenged by a Wonder Woman on Earth or other worlds. So, I thought, well, why wasn't Flash in the middle, right? Like, why would Flash, clearly Flash of Two Worlds, right?
Of course.
But I like what you said about, him being the first one that you see doubled up. So I thought Wonder Woman, okay, this is pure coincidence, but you could say she technically is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, multiverse story.
Technically, yes.
Yeah, that's why she gets center billing.
Plus, Perez is kind of fond of her.
That's right.
So she's not the most central DC character in this whole macro narrative.
No.
She doesn't really have that important a role to play. Most significant thing she does is get devolved into clay. But that's a good point that apparently I made several years ago, and I'm glad you dug that up, Peter.
Yep.
That she is technically, depending on how you look at it, the origin point for multiversal storytelling at DC.
And you can tell this is Wonder Woman. Obviously because it's Wonder Woman, but definitely pre-Crisis Wonder Woman because she has the circle earrings. She has that tiara that only has a point on high, not down below, and her hair is not what Perez would eventually give her. This sort of curly black hair that I always liked. So she has very clear pre-Crisis design elements.
Mm-hmm. Yep, she's aged a little bit, too. You can sort of see the Carolines creeping into her marble Amazonian features.
Oh.
but yeah, her hair's it's losing some of its luster. It's starting to lie a bit flatter. Doesn't have quite as much curl, as much verve to it. Yeah. So yeah, Earth 2 Diana was actually one of the first Justice Society members to be reintroduced. It was even before the first JLA JSA crossover, because there were a couple of like test stories in the Flash. The JSA appeared in flashback in Flash number 129, and then they made an official comeback in number 137 versus Vandal Savage, I believe it was, and Wonder Woman was among them. And so was the Carter Hall Hawkman. So that's kind of the first appearance of the Earth 2 Wonder Woman as the Earth 2 Wonder Woman. But I do like what you said about Harry G. Peter being the point of distinction between the two.
Right.
Then short little row of Earth 2 characters beyond that. First we've got Obsidian, founding member of Infinity Inc. and twin brother of Jade. His alter ego is Todd J. Rice, and he is the semi-legitimate son of Alan Scott, the Earth 2 Green Lantern, and his brief wife, a tragic figure named, the Golden Age Rose and the Thorn, who was an actual Golden Age character who appeared a couple of times. I think her name was originally Rose Forrest, but I guess to avoid confusion with the Earth 1 vigilante Rose and the Thorn, Roy Thomas decided to change her surname to Canton, as in the Forest Cantons. So she was married to Alan Scott briefly, but she had a split personality even then. Like she was being possessed by this evil force within her, the Thorn, which had plant-based powers that originated on the Isle of Tajmi. So she ran. She faked her own death and ran from Alan Scott, but she had already been impregnated with twins, whom she gave up for adoption, and one of them grew up to be Todd Rice. One of them ended up with green energy powers, similar to Papa Lantern, so kind of like inherited from the Starheart, which we eventually, at some point in the 70s, learn is the source of Alan Scott's powers, as opposed to the more conventional source of the Earth 1 Green Lantern Corps' power. But Obsidian ended up with shadow powers of darkness. He could turn himself into living shadow. He could also project darkness. And he had pretty serious anger issues. He had grown up in kind of a neglectful / abusive household. But he found his sister, and the two of them together sued for JSA membership because they had a hunch that they were connected to a JSAer. And eventually, I think it was Infinity Inc. Annual number 1, that we get the whole backstory. And Alan Scott also finally marries his better established Golden Age love interest, the Harlequin, a member of his rogues gallery, who then became his wife. So yeah, there's Obsidian. He was also one of the Great 15 from Crisis number 1, so we've seen him. Next to him is a fan-favorite Earth 2 character. That is the Huntress. Not to be confused with the original Earth 2 Huntress, who was a villain, who eventually we learned her real name was Paula Brooks. But this is Helena Wayne. This is the daughter of the Earth 2 Batman and the Earth 2 Catwoman. She had 2 first appearances. She's kind of unique in that regard. DC Superstars number 17 and All-Star Comics, that 70s revival, number 69. They came out on the same day. So there's some division of opinion as to which one should count as her first appearance, since DC Superstars number 17 told her origin story, and All-Star number 69 was her intro, in continuity as she meets up with the other JSA members, and eventually sues for membership herself. She was created by Paul Levitz and Joe Staten, and she first donned a costume to avenge the murder of her. The death of her mother, the Earth 2 Catwoman, who had been blackmailed into pulling one last job by a former henchman. And so she decided to become a huntress of crime and carry on the twin legacies of both her mother and her father. So kind of like a Batgirl figure, but doing things in a different way, more of a law of the jungle kind of way. And this incarnation of the Huntress continues to be well liked among DC fans, even though technically she can't Well, I guess you can, since there is a multiverse again. There is an Earth 2. We have had, post-Flashpoint, a version of an Earth 2 Huntress with a pretty different backstory. Like, she was Robin as a child, whereas Helena Wayne didn't put on a costume for the first time until after her mom died. She was just a lawyer until then, a partner in the firm of Cranston, Grayson, and Wayne. The Grayson's pretty self-explanatory. Cranston, probably a sly little nod to the Shadow. Important inspiration for the Golden Age Batman. So yeah, she had her own. She hung around in All Star Comics. She had backup series in Wonder Woman for a number of years, and she even had a few appearances in Batman Family. She crossed over to visit with the Earth 1 Batman and Robin a couple of times because, well, by then her father, the Earth 2 Batman, had perished. And she was feeling somewhat lonesome, I guess, and she took a couple of excuses to travel to Earth 1 just to meet up with Uncle Bruce and sort of reclaim her father a little bit. And she is an important POV figure in the Crisis story. We really see, I think more poignantly than anyone else, the tragedy of the continuity revisionism that the Crisis puts into place through her eyes, the metafictional human cost, as she finds herself reduced to a non-existent figure. This is the passion of the retcon, as I like to call it. And next to her is Wildcat. This is a Golden Age superhero. He was a prize fighter turned superhero, basically. He appeared in Sensation Comics, which is one of those anthology series that was originally on the All-American side of the DC divide. And, of course, All-American and National eventually merged into one unit, but he was on the All-American side. He was a prize fighter named Ted Grant, who adopted the costumed Avenger shtick to clear his own name, which had been sullied by some unscrupulous trainers of his. He was inspired by Alan Scott to do so. And he wasn't a member of the Justice Society. Check me on this. I don't think he actually was a member of the JSA during the Golden Age. I have here that he didn't join the JSA until Justice League of America number 46 and 47.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't know. So I'd have to look that up myself.
Yeah, he's just a Golden Age character that a number of people remembered fondly, just for being a little offbeat and a little more no nonsense than some of the other costume characters at the time. He was a scrapper. He wasn't quite as I don't want to say stupid, but unpolished a figure as later writer. I think in his Golden Age origin, his father trained him physically and mentally to be just as well-developed and well-rounded a person as he could be. But anyway, he was a member of the JSA from that time forward. He figured in those all-star issues. He sort of developed a feuding relationship with Power Girl. And by the mid-'80s, he's got himself a legacy figure all lined up. Yolanda Montez had made her first appearance just a couple of months before this, actually, in Infinity Inc. number 12, March of 85. So she was lined up to become the new Wildcat, and she would officially adopt that role, take up that mantle within the pages of Crisis itself, just a few issues down the line. And he's another one of those characters that kind of straddles the borderlines between Earths, because he had a couple of appearances in Bob Haney-written Brave and the Bold stories, teaming up with the Earth 1 Batman. So either there was an Earth 1 version of Ted Grant, Wildcat, who just kind of blinked out of existence when Crisis resolved itself, or those issues of the Brave and the Bold happened on Earth B, which is kind of a theoretical, fan-constructed parallel Earth used to house stories mostly written by Bob Haney that didn't fit into the continuity of any mainstream Earth, and which is probably one of the first ones destroyed by the Anti-Monitor.
All right. Let's go to line 5. Over on the left-hand side, we have Supergirl. You can barely see him right behind her. That's Deathstroke. Then we have Phantom Stranger in the fedora and the hat there. Cyborg, you can see his chin, metallic chin. And right next to Cyborg, you can barely see it, a little mouth with a mole. That's Dream Girl.
A star-shaped mole, no less.
And then to go to the middle there, we have Mr. Ray Palmer, the Atom.
Dr. Ray Palmer, thank you very much.
All right, so no real overview on this line or the line previously. So we have Supergirl, cousin of Kal-El, of Superman. She has been around since 1959. Kara Zor-El, she is sporting her headband look, which she got in her own series around issue number 13. Some of that was in anticipation of her movie, not so much of the design, but just to give her something a little extra special within her series, a new costume design and hopefully a new push for readers to jump on. Created by Mr. Otto Binder and Al Plastino. So then we have Deathstroke, and that is another Wolfman Perez creation.
One of the hardest, I think, to identify on here.
Mm-hmm.
I can see now that you mention it, that's clearly supposed to be the left eye of Deathstroke's mask.
Correct.
At first, I thought that was supposed to be the right eye of the Overmaster's face.
Yeah, it's a little tricky. Yeah, it's a little tricky. But if you go with like the division of the face, right? The right side of Deathstroke is all black because he lost an eye when his ex-wife shot him in the face, or at that time it was his wife. Shot him in the face. He wasn't quick enough and out blew out his eye. So you could even say the Perez drew him right there, right next to Nightwing, which would be sort of close in spirit. This is his first appearance in the Crisis, Mr. Slade Wilson. And is that the first villain on the Earth One side? I think so. That's the first villain that we see so far.
Going top to bottom, yes, you are right.
Yeah. Not much to say about it. He doesn't have much to do in the Crisis. We will see him later, but he shows up in group shots and some covers here and there. And then we have the Phantom Stranger, one of my favorite characters. You can tell it's the Phantom Stranger. He has the hat, and he has shadows over his eyes, which is a familiar sort of design for the character. It's like shorthand for the character. Created by John Broome, Carmine Infantino, Cy Barry. Been around since 1952. Another character earlier than Martian Manhunter that you could say is a clear mark for Earth One stories and Earth One continuity. This is his first appearance in the Crisis. We will see him within the issue as well. One of those characters that shows up. He had his own adventures. He was part of kind of like a horror storyline kind of thing, horror comics line. But in the superhero universe, he's kind of like the Watcher, right? He shows up, says some things, and you know something ominous is about to happen.
Right. He's really more a facilitator than he is an actor in the stories in which he appears.
No real origin for him until Secret Origins number 10, I think it is, in 1986, 87, where they just said, hey, let's get 4 creative teams and let's try to just come up with some crazy origins. One of them actually does have kind of like a crisis element to it. There's these future scientists that are trying to discover the origins of the universe.
Oh.
Yep, and that's not good. And you even see like a giant hand and everything. They don't necessarily reference Krona, I don't think, but it's been a while since I've read it. So, of course, Phantom Stranger pops up and says, no, don't do this. They capture him, tie him up, or put him into this, machinery. And one of the scientists also kind of agrees with him that they shouldn't be mucking around with this. So, of course, what happens is that scientist, when the experiment continues, he's the one that gets kind of drawn into it, gets powered, and he becomes the Phantom Stranger. And I'd have to read it again. I don't know if he becomes the next Phantom Stranger or if he becomes the Phantom Stranger and gets sent back in time and has to live his life all over again. So that's that one. The other 3 are, there's an Alan Moore one that's really great. There's a biblical one that's really great. But I thought that one has the most Crisis connection. So we may wind up looking at that at some point in the future. Also note that Phantom Stranger is an on-again, off-again, unofficial, but sometimes honorary member of the Justice League. Depending.
Whenever they need some mystic help.
Right. Perez did not draw him, right? I don't think he's one of the... Perez drew these postcards for the Justice League earlier than this, sometime around like 82 or 83, 84. And I don't think Phantom Stranger was part of that postcard series. So that's why I never really include him as a member. Cyborg, another Wolfman Perez creation, one of the Great 15. We've seen him throughout the Crisis to date. One of them, founding members of the New Teen Titans, Vic Stone. Of course, Perez would draw some more Titans on here. We'll go right to Dream Girl, member of the Legion of Superheroes. She's been around since 1964. Nora Nal is her name. She has shown up in the Crisis previous to this appearance here. Whenever the Legion appears in the future in the Crisis, she's usually there. And as we said, you can tell it's her because she has that little star-shaped mole right there on the side of her face. Now, some people draw it underneath her eye. Some people draw it above her lips. Perez decided to draw it underneath the lips or right aside of it because that's all the room he had left behind this earth.
Well, that's about how her Who's Who entry shows it, although it's a little bit higher.
Right? Yeah, it's like
right off the corner of her mouth as
right.
opposed to below.
Yeah. You'll see it bounce around a lot. And sometimes it's a star and sometimes it's star-like. It all depends on the artist. And then finally, Dr. Ray Palmer, excuse me.
Thank you very much.
In his Atom gear that is more in line with his appearances with Sword of the Atom.
Mm-hmm. He's in his full barbarian rig in this very issue, actually.
Where you see his hair and on top of it. So he doesn't have a full cowl. Sword of the Atom, one of my favorite miniseries from the 80s. And at this time, as this issue was being released, we were... the second Sword of the Atom special was being released as well. So after his 4-issue miniseries, he had 3 Sword of the Atom specials, and the second one was being released at this time. Created by Mr. Gardner Fox. There's that name again. Gil Kane, Murphy Anderson. And he's been around since 1961. And as you said, at this point, he is a man of kind of like 2 different worlds as well. The superhero world and this kind of strange, I don't want to say sword and I guess it sort of is sword and sorcery. It's a barbarian, like you said, a fantasy. Well, not fantasy, but
it is more science fiction. So it's like sword and science fiction.
That's better. I like that. Just because Gil Kane had a hankering to draw him, fighting frogs and snakes and initially, I read an article that initially it was supposed to be set in the Everglades in Florida, but they decided to, when Jan Stranad joined him, they said, let's go somewhere different, and that's why they stuck him in the Amazon, which I thought was a better choice. So, one thing about his mask, I think you would be a little hard pressed to know who this character was if he wasn't right up against the other Atom. But I loved in the first miniseries, because he was in South America for those first 4 issues of his Sword of the Atom miniseries, and he was wearing his mask the whole time, when he comes back to the States, he has a sunburn in the shape of his mask. And I loved that. I thought, what a great attention to detail.
That is a great detail.
That's how you know that's the Atom here. So, bless you. All right, and I don't have like I said, I don't have an overview of all of this this line. I couldn't think of anything snappy. So.
That's above and beyond, Peter. But yes, it's kind of a good thing that they went with this Sword of the Atom period cowl for Dr. Palmer, because otherwise it'd be harder to tell the difference between him and his Earth 2 counterpart, because they used his latter-day costume. Yes, said counterpart is, of course, the Atom of Earth 2, founding member of the Justice Society. His name is Al Pratt. The Mighty Might. He, when it first appeared in All-American number 19 in October of 1940, he had no superpowers at all. He was just a short guy. He was 5 foot 1 inch tall. He was nicknamed Atom Al by his bullying classmates at Calvin College. He was just a college student in those days. But then he bought lunch for a down-on-his-luck prize fighter. So in this, his origin was pretty similar to that of the Guardian and the Wildcat, which was picked up on by Roy Thomas, and he wrote a really strange story revealing that all 3 of those down-on-their-luck prizefighter mentors were actually the same guy. But to Al Pratt, his name was, I believe, Joe Morgan, and he trained Al to be a fighting machine, like a pint-sized dynamo. So he was able to get the most muscle power out of his tiny frame that he possibly could, and he donned a full head mask and a cape. He was kind of like a little circus strongman outfit. And he fought crime, and he joined the Justice Society. Had a long run in an All-American, followed by a long run in Flash Comics. Never appeared on a cover during all that time. So he was kind of an underappreciated member of the superhero establishment of the Golden Age. The costume that he is shown on this cover, the one with the finned head mask with a little cutout for his mouth, which is more than he had in his original mask. And you can't see it on the cover, but there's an atom symbol on his chest. Sometime in 1948, right around the same time Carter Hall started wearing that yellow head mask with the Red Hawk symbol on it. Al Pratt got a little bit of a redesign. He started wearing the costume with the finned cowl, and he also somehow acquired superatomic strength. It was never explained. So, of course, Roy Thomas took it upon himself to explain how that happened. And as was the case with a lot of stuff he did in the first couple of years of All-Star Squadron, it spun out of Action Comics number 21. It was Dr. Terry Curtis, the atomic scientist captured by Ultrahumanite, who became a reluctant atomic-powered villain called Cyclotron. He was responsible for Al getting those powers that he got. And so there he is, right there on the cover. And then... let's see, the rest of this row. We're going to go with Zatara for the first one there, followed by the Golden Age Sandman, the Monocle, the Shining Knight, Liberty Bell, and barely visible at the extreme margin of the cover is a head of straight, thick, shiny black hair that I believe belongs to Neptune Perkins. And I got to tell you, I was leaning pretty hard for some of these on ICG's official Crisis on Infinite Earths index, just taking their word for some of these things, because all you get for the character that they and I am calling Zatara, it could have been a couple of different things. It could have been the aforementioned Terry Curtis, Cyclotron, because he had a mustache. Could have been Tex Thompson, a.k.a. Mr. America. He had a mustache. So there's a few possibilities. But we're going with Zatara, Master Magician, because he is a very important early figure in DC history. He shares a first appearance with Superman. I don't know how many people know that, but he first appeared in Action number 1. His first name was John Zatara, later retconned by, of course, Roy Thomas as Giovanni, since he is of Italian descent. And he's one of several characters who walked the vibrational knife's edge between Earth 1 and Earth 2, because his daughter, Zatanna, became a member of the Justice League eventually, and spent her first several appearances wandering around Earth 1, trying to find what had happened to her father, who had disappeared. That was Zatanna's central motivation when she first appeared, just trying to locate her lost Golden Age great father. He was also one of several Golden Age characters to walk the knife's edge of Mandrake the Magician plagiarism, because his powers were different enough from Mandrake's, but his appearance was virtually identical. The tuxedo, the cape, the top hat, the mustache. He just wasn't a super hypnotist. He worked more substantive magic. He could actually alter reality just by speaking his spells backwards. Eventually, we learn this is because he's a distant descendant of an offshoot of humanity called Homo Magi, and so is his daughter Zatanna. He's also a distant descendant of Leonardo da Vinci. Just to give you some additional pedigree for Signor Zatara there. The whole connection to Homo Magi wasn't established until 1979, though. It was a Justice League story. And the events of Crisis. I mean, it's a good thing that he's a part of this story. He's shown among groups of magicians. I don't think he even has a line of dialogue in Crisis itself. But the events of Crisis do lead somewhat directly into the conditions of Signor Zatara's death in Swamp Thing number 50. And he was created, incidentally, by Fred Gardenier. Then we have the lower half of the distinctive custom gas mask worn by Wesley Dodds. Wesley Dodd in his first few Golden Age appearances, but eventually permanently amended to Dodds, who was the Golden Age Sandman. He is one of the oldest DC heroic characters, very much in the pulp tradition, which was picked up on by the creators of Sandman Mystery Theater, many years later for Vertigo. He first appeared in New York World's Fair Comics #1, or if you'd rather, Adventure Comics #40. Both of them came out in July of 1939. One of them was a little bit longer than the others. It's kind of like the difference for Namor the Submariner between Marvel Comics #1 and Motion Picture Funnies Weekly #1. Same story, but a couple of extra pages in one of them. Although Motion Picture Funnies Weekly was definitely earlier, whereas these two comics came out right about the same time. So yeah, he was kind of a classic pulp vigilante. He was haunted by dreams of wrongdoing, originally unexplained, much later attributed to a connection with Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, another Sandman character who was not created until like 40 years, or actually more like 50 years after Wesley Dodds himself. So he's a mainstay of the Justice Society. He gradually evolved more and more into a superheroic mold. There's the famous Simon and Kirby revamp, which put him into a yellow and purple costume. I think at the urging of editor Mort Weisinger, he also acquired his sidekick Sandy Hawkins, the Golden Boy. And that happened during a run in Adventure Comics, starting in... I don't have the number here, but it's somewhat later on. He was reintroduced in the Silver Age in Justice League of America #46, and he was back to pretty much his original outfit at that point, purple and yellow jumpsuit left behind.
Adventure Comics 69, that's where he was given his yellow and purple costume.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
1941.
And Roy Thomas came up with his own explanation for why that happened in All-Star Squadron, of course. He explained so much in that series. It's just like retcon Fort Knox. All right, so there's Sandman. He's one of the earliest DC figures, and he needs to be around when we're doing something like this that celebrates 50 years of DC history. Then we have the Monocle, who is another minor Golden Age villain who got a new lease on life thanks to being revived by much later creators. He actually, like Ragdoll, he had only one Golden Age appearance, and that was in Flash Comics #64, entitled The Man with the Magic Monocles. Real name Jonathan Cheval. He was an honest businessman, an optician, a lens grinder, whose good name was ruined by criminal activity. So when he got out of prison, he created some specially gimmicked monocles that could shoot energy beams, and he used them to gain vengeance on the criminals that had dragged his good name through the dirt. But I guess by then the damage had been done, and he ultimately decided to become a professional criminal. But he maintained a certain code of ethics, of honor, that several of his, and of professionalism that many of his contemporaries could not boast. He was another one of those Earth 2 characters that were dredged up by Conway and George Perez to be a part of Ultra Humanite's version of Secret Society of Supervillains in Justice League of America numbers 195 through 197. In 1981. That was the first time the Monocle had appeared since his introduction all the way back in 1945. And now here he is on the cover, again, probably because he was fresh in Perez's mind from that story just 4 years ago. Then up there we have a Golden Age character called the Shining Knight, alias Sir Justin of King Arthur's court at Camelot. And he kind of had Captain America's origin. He was a knight who was sent off on a quest to slay an ogre. He rescued the wizard Merlin from a predicament along the way, and Merlin enchanted his armor and sword to make it indestructible, and also gave his horse wings. So Sir Justin changed the horse's name from Victory to Winged Victory on the spot, and we do see Winged Victory in this issue. And then he gets trapped in an iceberg at the end of his battle with the ogre, and is frozen there, and is not thawed out until 1941, when he makes his first appearance in Adventure Comics #66, written and drawn by Craig Flessel. So he had a run of adventures in the 40s, and he was one of the characters that Roy Thomas first embraced because he wanted to use, for his early run on All-Star Squadron, he was trying to avoid the JSAers as much as he could and focus on other Golden Age characters that had not gotten much play since the Golden Age, who he fondly remembered and wanted to use, whereas the Justice Society got all kinds of use. Annually, at least in the Justice League title. So Roy Thomas was going for obscurities, and the Shining Knight was one of those that he fixated upon. And so there he is on the front cover with that sort of armored cap on his head, often worn in kind of a rakish fashion as he charges into battle. And he is one of the squadron members who got into a romantic relationship with the second Firebrand, pictured a few rows above. Next to him, speaking of All-Star Squadron and romantic relationships, is Liberty Bell, alias Libby Lawrence. She is an authentic female Golden Age character. She first appeared in Boy Commandos #1 in the winter of 1942. She had a nice 4-year run in Star Spangled Comics from 43 through 47, and then was pretty much forgotten about. She didn't have... she's shown here wearing that domino mask. I mentioned that because in her Golden Age story, she actually didn't wear a mask. She just combed her hair differently. Yeah, she combed it down in front of her face, a la Veronica Lake. And that was apparently good enough in the Golden Age to disguise her identity. Yeah, Roy Thomas kind of made fun of that. He assigned some superpowers to her in All-Star Squadron 2. She had no powers in the Golden Age, but actually, I'm not sure about that. She might... The ringing of the Liberty Bell gave her a little bit of a surge. So, yeah, I think that was actually Golden Age authentic. But it was Roy Thomas who tried to give it kind of a pseudo-scientific, pseudo-mystical background. Anyway, so she became not only a member of the All-Star Squadron, but its first elected chairperson, which is pretty progressive for Roy in the 80s and very progressive for anybody in 1941 or 42 when those stories were supposed to be set. And she was romantically involved with Johnny Quick, as I mentioned before, and the two of them actually got married within the All-Star Squadron run, and their daughter is a modern-age character known as Jessie Chambers or Jessie Quick. So, important legacy figure there. And then, way off on the side there, I had guessed it was Neptune Perkins, didn't think there was much chance that guess was right, but the... ICG guide, the index, backed me up on it. That is supposed to be Neptune Perkins, who was a very minor Golden Age character. He really only made 2 Golden Age appearances, and he wasn't even the star of his own strip. He was just like a supporting character in a pair of Hawkman stories by Gardner Fox and Joe Kubert in Flash Comics number 66 and I want to say 89. He actually appeared on the cover of that issue with Hawkman. His deal was that he was a person who was born with a mutant affinity for water and also a strange sodium deficiency which required him to soak himself in salt water regularly just to stay alive. So he could do that in a bathtub, but he preferred to do it by jumping in the ocean and having lots of adventures beneath the waves. So he was kind of like an undersea Sherpa for Hawkman. See, there you go. Peter just summoned up on his smartphone a better-looking image of the right-hand margin of this cover because my copy cuts Neptune Perkins' face off almost entirely. You see, this is what I had to work with.
Yeah.
This tiny little scratch of straight black hair and a little bit of skin. So yeah, he had only those 2 supporting roles in the Golden Age, and Roy Thomas remembered him, though, and brought him back for a few appearances in All-Star Squadron in issues number 33, 34, and 35. Right around the same time that another water-based character was popping up with whom Neptune Perkins would be intimately associated, because Neptune Perkins and this other character both became regular members of the Young All-Stars series that Roy Thomas would launch after Crisis. Neptune Perkins would become kind of the cosmic placeholder for the retconned out of existence Earth 2 Aquaman, because he too was a former denizen of Earth 2, a Golden Age character who had an affinity for water. He kind of retread the Earth 2 Aquaman origin, which was that he was just the son of a scientist who had been genetically engineered to be, to be able to live underwater. Neptune Perkins was just born that way, however. I don't think the scientist father angle was a part of his backstory. And Roy Thomas complicated his backstory quite a bit during the Young All-Stars years, trying to splice in elements from literature, like big chunks of Edgar Allan Poe's The Narrative of A. Gordon Pym and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. By that, he was thinking omniversally at that stage in his career. Like, he had done so much cross-referencing of old Golden Age stories, he decided that wasn't enough to suit him anymore. Now he had to start connecting comic stories to prose stories, like from the 40s and the 19th century and earlier. So that's one example of him doing that, Neptune Perkins. But as of August 1985, all we knew about him really was that he was this guy who could do water stuff. And he just barely made it onto this cover.
Yeah. Depending on how the printing worked for your particular copy of Crisis. And like I said, on some hardcovers, if they show the image, sometimes it's not even clear on that one either. You just got to kind of poke around and find it. All right, line number 6, Back to Earth 1, including some characters that are in between some lines. We have Swamp Thing, Dr. Polaris, and then if you scoot up from Dr. Polaris, we have Amethyst, Princess of Gem World. Hard to tell who that is, but there's a clue.
I could have sworn it was Terra.
Oh, well, she's dead by this point. So,
Well, so are a lot of the other characters on the cover, too. All time is one, remember?
well, who would be the other? Because remember, I thought the conceit was if they died. That's why we don't see Batman of Earth 2, because he technically is dead. Whereas you can show Golden Age Sandman and all the because they're technically still alive, but
Okay, fair point.
yeah,
But Scalp Hunter isn't.
Scalp wouldn't be alive in continuity, but was still alive in publishing continuity.
Well,
correct.
Yeah, but it's...
Yeah, I think that's what I think.
It all
that's
becomes
more
somewhat
what
relative.
Yeah, I think that's more what like
They can
same thing with like if Jonah Hex was on the cover, like.
Yeah, or Ari, which he is. And Arion, right?
Oh yeah,
below him.
Jonah Hex. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. All right, so Swamp Thing, Dr. Polaris, Amethyst, Red Star. A lot of guys with visors on this cover that you got to go by hairstyles.
It was the 80s. The future was so bright, everybody had to wear shades.
Then we have Joker, a very classic-looking Joker there.
Love it.
And then Mr. John Stewart, Green Lantern, connecting there. Because remember, Hal Jordan, nowhere to be found, not even mentioned in the Crisis, not even mentioned in this issue.
Not by name, no. But
No.
They talk about the other Green Lantern.
Yeah, like, boy, they couldn't even name... I wonder if they thought they were going to kill Hal Jordan in his own book at that point. Like, why was there so much, like, he's just nowhere?
He was really Laterna non grata. It was like he was blacklisted or greenlisted.
No real connection here other than to say there are a few characters who have a fondness for purple. Joker.
A few that have a fondness for green, too.
And, oh, yeah, green. Yeah, you could. That's right. Green and purple, which is a sign of Marvel villainy. So that is very true. It's like almost alternating. All right, so Swamp Thing. I looked up, I looked up a couple of these characters to see if they've appeared in the Crisis before. I was pretty certain that this was his first appearance. Well, turns out that a lot of the annotations in issue number 4, when Earth 1 and Earth 2 are slowly, being destroyed, while the Monitor and Pariah are talking to each other, there's several images going around the DC universe. And one of those images that we talked about in one of the episodes covering issue number 4, we thought it was Anthro. We thought that there was an image of like this explosion and there's this but we sort of remarked that he looked a little bulkier. Well, people are saying that is actually Swamp Thing in that image. You could look it up in the hardcover there.
Which issue was it?
Number 4, at the end of number 4. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, I guess it could be, because I thought it was Anthro just because we had seen Anthro a couple times prior to the story. And it's not colored correctly. It's certainly not colored correctly in the issue, and it's not also colored correctly in the hardcovers. It's more of like a grayish tone to it, right? As you're looking at it. Yeah. So it's we sort of said, well, is it Anthro? Because he's kind of bulky. People are saying it's Swamp Thing. Now, a couple things about that panel, and I know we're going backwards here, but this is just like an addendum to issue number 4.
Call it responding to feedback.
Yeah. I also think it's Anthro because of the trees. They look kind of jungly. They look
primordial.
Yes. But
at the same time, there are rabbits and feathered birds and
right,
things.
Exactly. There's fauna, or is it fauna?
Yeah, fauna, animal life,
right,
which is more or less modern looking.
Right, and that's why I thought, okay, I guess you could say that Swamp Thing, but I think Perez. I don't know. Maybe it's because this is the Perez art that's being inked by Mike DiCarlo, that it's not so clear. The colorist didn't get the assignment. I don't know. So people are saying that's Swamp Thing. So I guess I'll give it to them because even though I want it to be Anthro, I'm not sure if it is. So this would be Swamp Thing's second appearance in the Crisis. Swamp Thing, been around since 1972, created by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightston. A character that is still part of the DC universe as of this series, although that would change in a number of years. And he would be going through, as you mentioned, he would be going through his own sort of crisis over in his title leading up to issue 50, which was a lot of fun. I think it was it called the Light and Darkness War, or the Darkness War, something like that.
Something very much like that.
Yeah.
It's a culmination of the American Gothic story.
Yeah, and it had very crisis-like story bits to
Oh,
it.
yes.
Story beats, story bits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a bunch of champions of the supernatural teaming up to stop a shadow creature, a great evil beast from ransacking heaven.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Polaris, created by John Broome and Gil Kane. One of the great 15. We've talked about him before in a previous issue. On again, off again, Green Lantern villain. Gotta love his headgear. If you know Magneto over in the Marvel Universe, then you more or less know Dr. Polaris to some degree. And would go on to have a post-crisis career as well. He was one of those that I referenced as wearing purple. So Amethyst, the only way you can really tell it's Amethyst is you have to look closely between the ears of Phantom Stranger and Cyborg. She has her tiara that she's wearing. That if you know Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, she wears this tiara at the top of her head, not like Wonder Woman across the brow. And it has this design element to it. So that's how you know that is Amethyst. And that's what it's become to be known as. It even looks like there's a gemstone in it, if you look closely.
Yep. Yeah, you win that one, Peter. But it's just the kind of look of naivete on her face, and the way her hair is parted there. It made me think of Terra. Plus the fact that it's Perez drawing this.
Right.
Got me thinking that along those lines.
Also, don't forget, Tara wears a mask in her superhero costume.
Well, that is true.
Her face mask.
That is true.
So, Amethyst, created by, again, Dan Mishkin, Gary Cohn. Artist Ernie Colon, who unfortunately passed away just a short number of weeks ago. We lost a pretty great artist there. She had been around since 1983, and her, along with Warlord, they are in a panel later in the issue that we'll have a conversation about that, about their characters and about their locations and how they factor into the whole Crisis on Infinite Earths. She's another being of magic. She will have a couple story beats later on in the Crisis, not only in the issue, but in a tie-in as well, mixed in with Dr. Fate and the Lords of Order, like you talked about. So.
Very striking, iconic cover featuring Dr. Fate's Helm of Nabu taking up the whole damn thing.
Yeah, yeah. She's definitely someone who you have to imagine that they managed to find a way to use the Crisis to connect her to the larger DC universe, as opposed to being sort of shunted off to the side. Whether that was a smart move or not, I don't know. We could argue that. All right, then we have Mr. Red Star, also created by Len Wein, Marv Wolfman, Bill Drout. Been around since 1968 when he had one appearance in Teen Titans number 18. Teen Titans, the first volume, the Silver Age, where he was called Starfire. Technically DC's first Russian superhero, yes, I think.
Superhero? Yeah, it would almost have to be.
Yeah. And then he would show up after that in New Teen Titans issue 18, keeping the same numbering, that one by Wolfman and Perez, where he would become known as Red Star. And this Crisis appearance is pretty much his fourth appearance in DC Comics altogether. Third or fourth, maybe fifth, somewhere around there. He doesn't have many appearances, although he will have more appearances after all of this. So he is a New Teen Titans or Teen Titans supporting cast member. You can tell it's him because of his hairstyle more than anything. If you connect it with how Perez draws him inside the book, or if you look back on those on the New Teen Titans issue, you can sort of tell it's him. Also, the way there's a little bit of mask above the visor. There's some. It's very specific. It's very different than, say, some of the other characters that have visors, where the visor goes all the way up to the top. So that's Mr. Red Star, Leonid Kovar. Yeah, I'm thinking of Walter Kovacs. That's a whole other thing. Then we have Mr. Joker, as seen in Crisis number 3. This is the Joker that I always think of in terms of like pre-Crisis Joker, pre-Crisis Batman villain. The one that has the whenever his henchmen wear his face on a jacket or it's on the side of a helicopter, that's the face I always see.
Yeah.
Very elongated,
That enormous violin jaw.
Yeah.
I just, in a DCBS shipment I got yesterday, received the hardcover Bronze Age Joker Omnibus.
Ooh.
So a lot of this facial structure of Joker in that volume.
Yeah. There's also even a tiny bit in the eyes. I see a little bit of Cesar Romero, just a tiny bit. But you gotta love that character. I mean, he's also been around forever, since 1940. And again, one of the few villains on the Earth One side.
Soon to be a major motion picture.
Yeah, that's right. And then we have Mr. John Stewart, created by Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams. He's been around since 1971. He had taken over for Hal Jordan at this point. He was one of the Great 15 in Crisis number 1. So we have talked about him and his place within the DC Universe before. It's kind of cool that he is used as the counterpoint between Earth 1 and Earth 2, because most people at this time would say it's Hal Jordan, but as we said, Hal Jordan is not Green Lantern at this point. So I'm glad they didn't shy away from it, though. I'm glad they still used an Earth 1 Green Lantern, especially the one that was foremost in the title at this point, and that they didn't just sort of put in, like, I don't know, did we miss? Who else could they have put in? I'm sure there's somebody else we could have done. But I'm glad they didn't just go, oh, we don't have Hal Jordan, so we can't do it. No, they were smart. They were smart. They kept with what was, the character that they've had since issue 1. So
yeah, it plays right into the one of the overarching themes, which is the collision of the old and the new.
Yeah. Yep.
And I'm pretty sure this issue gives us our first meeting between John Stewart, Green Lantern of Sector 2814 in the Earth 1 universe, and on the other side of the axis of symmetry there, Alan Scott, the only Green Lantern of Earth 2 in its universe. Yes, he was originally supposed to be called Alan Ladd, but then the actor by that name began his rise to stardom, so it was quickly changed to Alan Scott. Eventually, Ladd was given to him as a middle name. If you look at his Who's Who entry, it says Wellington, which I still think is a cooler sounding middle name for that character. First appeared in All American Comics number 40 by Martin Odell, and he has this magic ring carved from a magic lantern that gives him magic powers, which were originally pretty much just keeping him safe from physical harm, except against things made of wood, but gradually expanded to become much more like the powers that Hal Jordan and his power ring would eventually have in 1959. And they are magical, and we've eventually, as I mentioned earlier, sometime in the 70s, we get a story explaining where his ring came from and how it was connected to the Guardians of the Universe in Earth 1. And since this whole Crisis event is distantly tied to happenings in Green Lantern comics between Earth 1 and Earth 2, it seems appropriate to bring it up here. The Guardians of the Universe, in one of their first steps to try and safeguard the universe of Earth 1 from evil, which we eventually learn is, Krona, one of their number, was responsible for. He unleashed evil into the universe. They gathered up all the ambient magical energy in their universe, since magic equals chaos, and chaos equals the potential for evil. So they scooped as much of it up as they could, shot it through with some of their own emerald energy to stabilize it, I guess, and then shot it into another dimension, namely the universe of Earth 2. It became sentient there. It bored into the core of a star, named itself the Starheart, and sent a little chunk of its essence in meteoric form down to Earth 2, where it was fashioned in ancient China into a lantern. And it kind of came through the ages all the way down to Alan Scott in the 40s, who then fashioned his power ring and became a superhero with it. So there's your encapsulated history there. So he is a magic-based character, 100%. And he's a founding member of the Justice Society post-crisis. With no Superman around, he kind of fell into the role of the heavy hitter of the squad, the one that everybody looked up to. And he is indeed a very powerful figure. Next to him is, I'll just read off the rest of this row. Nuklon of Infinity Inc., Tsunami, the Guardian of Earth 2, the Vigilante of Earth 2, with the bandana over his face, right below the Guardian's head. And then in the turban, Sargon the Sorcerer, and on the right-hand edge, the Tarantula. All right, so Nuklon is one of those Infinitors. He first appeared in All-Star Squadron number 25, and he's yet another character or concept to spin out of Roy Thomas's love of Action Comics number 21. He is the grandson of Dr. Terry Curtis, the atomic scientist who became Cyclotron, battled the JSA and the All-Star Squadron unwillingly, but died heroically to save them from Ultrahumanite. He fathered a daughter before he passed on, and her name was Terry Kurtzberger, because that was Terry Curtis's real last name, Roy Thomas tells us. And she married a guy named Julian Rothstein, and Philip, that was the guy's name, who was a helicopter pilot who died in Vietnam. But their son, Albert Julian Rothstein, the grandson of Cyclotron, inherited certain powers thanks to the mutated genes passed on by his grandpa. And so he gained the ability to, he had sort of born with the ability to change his size and density. So he could grow from, actually I'm wrong. He wasn't born with that power. He just became unnaturally large. He was 7 feet 6 inches with superhuman strength. And exposure to thorium radiation after that gave him the ability to grow to like double that, so like 15 feet tall, with even greater superhuman strength and mass. Plus, he could also, for a time, alter his density so he could walk through walls, but that power didn't last. And he had a mohawk, obviously. And I think his appearance on this cover is out of date because Infinity Inc. Went public with their secret identities fairly early in their run. They outed themselves as superheroes, and in the process outed some of their superhero parents, since Infinity Inc. were all like the proteges or children of pre-existing JSA members. And he was the grandson of Cyclotron and the godson of Al Pratt, the Golden Age Atom, who was kind of a father figure to him, especially after his real father died in that helicopter crash in Nam. But anyway, he probably shouldn't be wearing a mask on this cover because he and his teammates decided to do away with masks and secret identities and revealed their real names to the public. But there it is, mask and mohawk both present. Then next to him, Tsunami. This is purely a Roy Thomas creation. She first appeared in All-Star Squadron number 33 in May of 1984. So she's a little over a year old by the time Crisis number 5 went to print. She was a mutant hydrokinetic and an American-born Imperial Japanese sympathizer who studied in Japan and kind of became galvanized over there to the Japanese cause, especially when she heard about the internment camps that her friends and relatives were being hustled into in United States territory back home, because she was born and raised in Santa Barbara. So she came back over. She had been... I'm blanking on whether her ability to control water, especially to create and control tidal waves, was natural born or given to her by Imperial scientists. But her handler, Prince Daka of Imperial Japan, he gave her that name personally, and gave her a costume and sent her over here to try to rile up all the Issei and Nisei over here in America against American rule and join the Japanese cause. But she quickly discovered, after a clash with the All-Star Squadron in issues number 33 and 34 of that series where she first appeared, that they were more honorable than the people she was working for, so she ran away and eventually had a crisis of conscience and eventually joined the American side in the war, the Allies, and became a member of the Young All-Stars. And she and Neptune Perkins ended up having a relationship. They married, and much, much later had a daughter named Debbie Perkins, or Deep Blue, who had blue skin and water controlling abilities somewhat similar to her mother's, and water survival abilities similar to her dad's. Neat character that I wish were used a little more often. She was in Peter David's Aquaman run.
Right.
That's about it. So yeah, that's Tsunami. Her real name is Mia Shimada, if I forgot to mention that. Next to her is the Guardian, alias Officer Jim Harper, who is best known as the legal guardian, which is kind of how he ended up with his superhero moniker as well, of the Newsboy Legion, one of the famous Simon Kirby kid gangs, who he first appeared alongside the Newsboy Legion in Star Spangled Comics number 7. And he was just a local beat cop who took a shine to a bunch of lovable roughnecks, a bunch of kids who collectively called themselves the Newsboy Legion. And he was kind of their guardian angel, and eventually even took on a costumed superhero identity, complete with the blue tights and the golden helmet and a big gold shield shaped like a badge, which really should have been a giveaway to the kids that their friendly neighborhood police officer was also the Guardian. And he mainly fought crime for other reasons, but also to keep the newsboys out of trouble. So he was a recurring member of that group and their mentor. And he's another one of those characters that kind of straddles the line between Earths, because the Newsboy Legion as adults factored into Kirby's Fourth World run of Jimmy Olsen in 1971. They were parts of Project Cadmus, and it was they who created a clone of the Guardian to be active in the then-present era of the 1970s as the Golden Guardian. So there kind of was a version of the Newsboy Legion and the Guardian on Earth-1 based on that, since this was all happening in the same world as Jimmy Olsen and the Earth-1 Superman, after all. But this is certainly the Earth-2 version of the Guardian that we're seeing here. Below him is the Vigilante in his cowboy hat and his vigilante bandit mask. Yet another Earth straddler, because the Vigilante, a version of the Vigilante, probably native to Earth 2, interacted with the Justice League a little bit. And that was Justice League of America number 78 and 79 in 1970. Yeah, and he was riding his motorcycle at that time. So he was, his name was Greg Sanders or Saunders, depending on what source you listen to. That's a real sticking point for DC, it seems. A lot of characters were named either Sanders or Saunders, and later writers kept switching the spellings back and forth.
Kendra Sanders.
Shaira Sanders, Speed Saunders.
Yeah.
Pick one. But anyway, whatever his last name happens to be, he was a cowboy radio star. He was a country and western music singer known as the Prairie Troubadour, who also moonlighted as a masked lawman. And he wore that same cowboy hat and that face mask that you see there. He was a member of the Seven Soldiers of Victory, so he ended up being distributed through time and space along with his fellow soldiers. And so that was in issues number 100 and 101 of Justice League, less than 3 years after that other Vigilante story that I mentioned. So obviously there's an Earth 1 and an Earth 2 cowboy-clad Vigilante, but the Earth 1 version was long since forgotten by 1985, clearly. His first appearance was in Action Comics number 42, and he ran in Action Comics all the way through 1954. So he's another one of those guys that had a long post-Golden Age run that is not very well remembered. I think that Earth 1 version might... there were some appearances in Adventure Comics and World's Finest Comics, and I think that might have ended up being the Earth 1 version of Vigilante, too. But... like I said, that version of Vigilante didn't figure into Crisis and very quickly became irrelevant and retconned out of existence. But yeah, so that is the cowboy masked Earth 2 Vigilante, who had a couple of different sidekicks. He fought alongside a Chinese-American youth named Stuff the Chinatown Kid in his solo adventures, and a crusty old... Gabby Hayes type guy called Billy Gunn the Times Square Cowboy in his appearances with the Seven Soldiers in leading comics. Then we have Sargon the Sorcerer, who's one of my favorite Golden Age Earth 2 characters. In the turban there. His real name is John Sargent. He is the son of an archaeologist named Richard Biddle Sargent, who found that big gemstone on top of his turban there, which is not just decoration. It's central to his character and his power set. It's the Ruby of Life, which is an ancient, very powerful gemstone. If it's the first thing that a newborn baby sees and touches after being born, it bonds with that baby, and that baby will then control the gem and its power for the rest of his life. That's what happened to John Sargent. He gained the ability to control matter. Basically, any matter he touches, he can then sort of kinetically shape. So that's his magic ability. So very similar to Zatara, he decided to disguise his genuine magical ability by becoming a stage magician, and he also adventured around fighting crime wherever he found it. So he was also kind of in the Mandrake ripoff family. Yeah, he had a little sidekick named Maximilian O'Leary, who was Irish. And post Golden Age, he was used in a villainous role a couple of times when he was first revived. We have writer Mike Friedrich to thank for that. He first appeared in All American number 26. He had a long run there and also in Sensation Comics. But when he came back in the Silver Age, he ended up being a bad guy. But then he kind of walked a weaving line between heroism and villainy for much of the rest of the Silver and Bronze Ages. But he did enough good for the Justice League that, similar to what you said about the Phantom Stranger, he was offered honorary membership. And apparently, they just give those things out to any. They're honorary membership whores in the Justice League. They'll give that designation out to any magician that helps them on like one adventure. But yeah, he's another guy that kind of wandered unexplainedly between Earth 1 and Earth 2. And also, similar to Zatara, he ended up dying in the same issue, Swamp Thing number 50, under the same conditions. But that was not the end of his story, as he would come back from the dead at least once and continue to wobble back and forth between good and evil.
What was there was a Ruby of Life, and what was the other one? There was wasn't it an All-Star Squadron? There was something else. Somebody else had.
There was one issue of Secret Origins
is that what it is?
that it broke down a lot of different magic. Like it was Zatara and Zatanna, but it was also kind of a history of magic in the DC universe in general.
I'll have to look up that actually.
I think that's what you're thinking of. That there were a few different magic gemstones. Maybe it was the Red Moonstone of Yggdrasil you're thinking of.
I'll look it up.
He's Gartel. Sorry, yeah. He's Gartel.
Let me look it up.
Sorry, everybody. All right, while you're looking that up, I'll talk about the last face on this row, and that is Mr. John Law, the Golden Age Tarantula of Earth 2. His background was that he was a mystery writer who got so into the pulp mystique that he decided to actually put on a costume and fight some crime. He was created by Mort Weisinger, who was also the guy who had Simon and Kirby put Sandman, another pulp-inspired adventurer of the day, into purple and yellow long johns. The Tarantula had purple and yellow long johns plus a cape from his first appearance in Star Spangled Comics number 1, 1941. He ran for 19 issues there. He's not really a very important figure from the Golden Age. He had a housekeeper named Olga, and who was like his Alfred, and he had some spider-themed gimmicks, like suction pads and a web gun, which was similar to Sandman's wirepoon gun he ultimately adopted. But then Roy Thomas got a hold of him and revived him for All-Star Squadron and explained the whole purple and yellow tights thing, both for Sandman and for Tarantula, and ultimately ended up putting Tarantula in the brown and black suit that he would wear for the rest of his appearances in that series. You know, the costume for which he is justly better remembered, even though it's not an authentic Justice League suit. It's just, a Golden Age suit. It's just a lot less stupid looking. I think we can all agree. And you can tell that it is he because of those black lines at the very top of his face mask, just below the hairline. Those are the two of the 8 legs of the spider that appears on his head mask. And I had to rely on that because, once again, the right-hand side of the cover of my copy of this issue is kind of cut off.
So I looked up All-Star Squadron issue number 28. Is that? I just lost what it is. It was a story with Spectre, and 28. This cover here.
You know what? The Ring of Life.
The Ring of Life. Yeah,
yes.
It was cut from the same. The Ring of Life and the Ruby of Life were cut from some stone.
Yes, some primal stone of life.
Yeah. And I'm gonna defend my boy Perez, where you talked about Nuklon shouldn't have a mask on. I drew up a couple. I was looking at a couple covers for Infinity Inc. This one is from April 1986. He's still wearing the mask. Nuklon is still wearing the mask there, and this is
April of '86.
Yeah. He soon after one of the covers, you'll see he does not have the mask. So I do remember that press conference issue you're talking about, because I think it was also Yolanda Montez's first appearance. And they do lose the masks later, but it's not quite just yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to defend my boy Perez there.
All right.
Although he does make a mistake in this issue, or somebody makes a mistake in this issue, a rather big one.
It's hard to avoid with this many details to keep straight.
Yeah. All right, line 7. No overarching theme on this one. So if you take away the UPC symbol, that is Chameleon Boy from the Legion of Superheroes. You can tell by the antenna.
You don't even need to take away the UPC symbol.
Right. Yeah, you should be able to figure out who that is. And then diagonal to him is Steel. Excuse me.
That is Hank Haywood III, right?
Right. The Earth One Justice League Detroit member. Then we have Solivar, the gorilla there, also being hidden a little bit by the UPC symbol. Jonah Hex with his scar face and that big eyeball. Starfire, no pupils and just a huge amount of hair, very round face. That's Starfire. And then Mr. Oliver Queen, Green Arrow of Earth One. So that's that line there. All right, so Chameleon Boy's been around since 1960, created by Jerry Siegel and Jim Mooney. He has shown up in several appearances in the Crisis with the Legion of Superheroes. His name is Mr. Reap Daggle. He is a Durlan. And as I said, you can tell by his antenna there. Steel, this is his first appearance in the Crisis, created by Jerry Conway and artist Chuck Patton, a member of Justice League Detroit. Jerry Conway using a legacy that he created the original Steel, right, from the 70s? Yes, that was also him?
Definitely did, yes.
Right. So using Steel as part of Earth 2, the original Steel, and then bringing his grandson into Earth 1, even before the Crisis was even coming about. He sort of crossed Earths. So another one of those, a family at least, that actually moved back and forth. So it's kind of amazing that there was a lot of that going on, and maybe that's part of the confusion that Wolfman wanted to address, that there was all this back and forth stuff.
If he hadn't, Roy Thomas would have ironed it all out eventually, given enough issues of All-Star.
It's also kind of interesting as you're going through a lot of these Earth 2 characters to see how much lineage, superhero lineage is going on Earth 2. We sort of think of Jay Garrick to Barry Allen to Wally West to Impulse, right? Or what's another one? What would be another one? Or think of like Hal Jordan to Kyle Rayner, right? But even before the Crisis, the Earth 2 universe was doing that a lot.
Oh, yeah. Roy Thomas made Legacy an issue, and arguably Levitz in All-Star Comics was doing that even before that.
Yeah, so that's kind of interesting. As you were going through, I was like, oh, yeah. I particularly picked it up with the whole Ma Hunkel Android Red Tornado thing, right? Like there's
he was programmed with her memories.
Right. And it was utilizing the name, if not the identity. So even before the whole, we sort of say that the Silver Age really is something that did that, taking a name but creating a new identity. Well, there was a lot of that going on Earth 2 already. So anyway, that's a tangent. All right, so Solivar, one of the Great 15. He's been around since 1959, created by John Broome and Carmine Infantino. There's those names again. So he's been around since issue 1, but then he suffered an injury, so he was taken off the Crisis map on issue number 3. Jonah Hex, been around since 1972. He has also showed up in the Crisis, one of DC's Western heroes, a bounty hunter, showing off their larger genre, which is something that I guess it's a little more unique to Earth 1 than Earth 2, right? Because there's still sort of mystery. Like Vigilante is still like a mystery man. Well, they turn him into a mystery man, right?
Yeah, I think he was kind of a mystery man from the start.
Yeah.
He was just a cowboy singer who moonlighted as a cowboy hero. But in the present,
Right.
he got his chance at being a real Old West cowboy thanks to the Nebula Man sending him back in time.
Right.
But
And I guess really Golden Age, even though they were superhero stories, they were almost all war stories because it was going on during, a lot of their stories were functioning during the war.
that is a fair point.
Yeah.
Even if they weren't set in the theater of war, there were plenty of Nazis and spies and saboteurs and fifth columnists running
Right.
around.
Starfire, she's been around. She's another Wolfman Perez creation, another new Teen Titans member. She has showed up in the Crisis. Coriander from the Vega star system, which has also showed up in the Crisis as part of the origin of Dr. Light #2 that we saw earlier on in this cover. We will see her a little bit more in the Crisis before she is taken out of the Crisis story because of events going on in New Teen Titans and Tamaran, and with Nightwing and Dick Grayson,
Right,
etc.
that's her shotgun wedding to Prince Karras, right?
Right. And then Mr. Green Arrow, Oliver Queen, first appeared 1941, Mort Weisinger, George Papp. However, I'm going to go with the 1958 first appearance in Adventure Comics 250, as penciled by Jack Kirby, which I have to assume they're using that as the delineation between Earth 2 and Earth 1, Green Arrow and Speedy.
Makes good enough sense to me.
Yeah. At this point in the Crisis, he's been mostly featured in Detective Comics because he is not with the Justice League of America. So he's been in backup tales in Detective Comics. He has his relationship with Black Canary. And this is also his first appearance in the Crisis as someone who, a relatively important figure, I think, within the DC universe, gets a rather late start within this series. But that is what I have for Mr. Oliver Queen. And then that's it for this line. Oh, my God. Are you going to look something up? What do you got there?
What did you you had the
I
first...
have Adventure Comics 250. What do they have?
That's exactly what they have.
Okay.
In Who's Who.
Yeah, the Who's Who, the first volume. I think we talked about this before in an earlier episode. They were pretty good about delineating between the two versions of Batman, Green Lantern. Well, that's obvious. Green Arrow. They did not do that for Superman or Wonder Woman, but for those two characters at least, they were very specific.
Superman and Wonder Woman came along late enough that they decided not to bother doing an entry for the pre-Crisis Earth 1 versions of those characters, which is kind of a shame.
So, I'm going to make an argument that, yes, that is Solivar, but could it also be Gorilla Grodd?
It could be.
Yeah, because there's a couple of things about it. You'd have to look at if we open up the hardcover version of it, so you get a clearer shot so that there's no UPC symbol.
But he's got such a sad face.
He does have a sad face. I think part of it, though, is also depending on the coloring and the printing, where, look at that version of it, where the UPC, when you actually get to see the whole face, it's a much broader face. And so what you think you're seeing is sad is really Jonah Hex's hat, right? So it looks like it's creating a sad eye effect on when you have the UPC symbol, but that's Jonah Hex's hat blocking his visage. Okay, so now look at this face. The nose is very wide, where Perez draws Solivar's nose not so wide, and the little furry chops that are coming down could be both Gorilla Grodd or Solivar. So yes, it's probably Solivar. He's shown up, but I'm also going to think about story purpose, right? Solivar is out of this story. He's recovering at this point. And not that this cover is storytelling in nature, but they're pretty good, again, about trying to make sure they have characters that kind of exist at this moment. And at this particular moment, Solivar is off the playing field, and he won't be seen again for a number of issues. So, yes, it probably is Solivar. But I'm also making a point of, it could also be Gorilla Grodd. I don't know. You couldn't tell. The only way you could tell is if it was colored. Because in a later cover for Crisis, Grodd is brown, and Solivar is more like blackish gray. And brown is not really the right color for Grodd either.
Are you thinking of the cover to
the villain one?
Yeah. That let me. I think that might be Monsieur Malat that you're thinking of.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the
bandolier.
The bandolier, which he does have in this issue here. So that's why I was thinking that was.
Yeah, and he doesn't have the brain by his side either. But brown would be the correct color for Monsieur Malat.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So, That's just me just kind of throwing a little tangent. As I looked at it, I went, oh, yeah, I guess it is Solivar, but he's not technically in the story right now. But
Not
that's
right now,
okay.
but as a member of the Great 15. I mean, he's not every member of the Great 15 is on this cover, though.
Right.
Well, let's see. Okay, so crossing the divide here, we come to the Earth 2 version of Green Arrow. Okay, so his first appearance takes us all the way back to, on the right page here. Yeah, here we go. More Fun, number 73, November of 1941. He was created by George Weisinger, whose influence as an editor probably had as much as anything to do with keeping green.
Mort Weisinger?
What did I say?
George.
Oh, I was thinking
George.
Mort Weisinger and George Papp. Yes, that's yes. Yes. Thank you, Peter. Sure. It's Mort Weisinger. Certainly, I know that. But Mort Weisinger's influence as editor probably had as much as anything to do with why Green Arrow survived the end of the Golden Age as a continuing strip. So yeah, he began his adventures in Mightiest. We didn't get an origin for him sometime later, but when we did, it's very different from the familiar, stranded on a desert island and has to learn archery to survive story. The Earth 2 Golden Age Green Arrow's origin involves Oliver Queen being a collector of American Indian artifacts. His collection is nearly stolen by a bunch of criminals. He stops them, but accidentally destroys much of the collection in the process, so he goes off to Lost Mesa, which is supposed to be this treasure trove of Native American artifacts and handicrafts and things, and he tries to find more, and the criminals trail him there, and he gets trapped in a cave along with young Roy Harper. And the two of them then become the avenging archers, known as Green Arrow and Speedy, by picking up the supply of arrows they find there and shooting their way out. And so that's the origin of the Earth 2 battling bowmen, known as Green Arrow and Speedy. They too, Golden Age Green Arrow was never a member of the Justice Society. In fact, he never joined the JSA even after returning from being scattered across time and space by the Nebula Man. He ended up semi-amnesiac, I think, and in medieval England, where he became the inspiration for Robin Hood instead of the other way around. But when he was brought back to modern times, he really didn't do much. I mean, that happened in Justice League of America, number 100 and 101, the rescue of the 7 soldiers of victory. He didn't have very many appearances after that. Roy Thomas used him a couple of times in Infinity Inc. and saw to it that he was recolored with brown hair, which is not, he was blonde hair and blue eyes in the Golden Age, but Roy Thomas just thought there were too darn many yellow-haired characters running around, so he made it a point to recolor Golden Age Green Arrow, Earth 2 Green Arrow's hair, as a further point of distinction between the Earth 1 and Earth 2 versions of the character. So, if there were color here, we would see blonde Earth 1 Ollie Queen and brunette Earth 2 Ollie Queen side by side. Also the marked difference in their hats also helps. So yeah, there's your Earth 2 Green Arrow. It's always kind of fascinated me, these Earth 2 characters that we didn't get to see very much of. Then we have the Robin of Earth 2. This is Earth 2's Dick Grayson, who never took on the identity of Nightwing. Did for a time wear a really hideously ugly combination of Batman's costume and his own, a gray bodysuit with yellow cape and like a ribbed collar and ugh. So he had his first appearance as Earth 2 Robin. Obviously, his first appearance overall was Detective number 38, but that horrible costume first appeared in Justice League number 55 in 1967, the super crisis that struck Earth 2. And then he modified that to a better version, just a grown-up long pants version of his original costume. He started wearing that at the beginning of the revived All-Star Comics number 58 in 1976. And as I mentioned earlier about Huntress, he was also a partner in the law firm of Cranston, Grayson, and Wayne. And for a time, he was the ambassador of the Earth 2 United States to Earth 2 South Africa. A little detail there. Yep, and so he was a member of the Super Squad, but never expressed any real interest in joining the Infinity Inc. But he, like Huntress, will be fairly important in the final act of the Crisis story. Then we have, you mentioned earlier how they might possibly have just not put the 2 green arrows opposite each other in the central axis of this cover. They could possibly have taken Kara Zor-El and Kara Zor-El. The next headshot we have here, Power Girl, and put them on either side of that divide because they are Earth. They don't have the same name, but they are Earth 2 and Earth 1 versions of the same being. Karazor L, just the letter L, not spelled out EL, first appeared in that same key All-Star Comics number 58 from 1976, which I still can't get over. I bought my copy of that for like 50 cents at a back issue sale in like 1998.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm holding on to that. That's a very important issue. But yeah, so she arrived in a Kryptonian symbio ship, and she arrived at a later point in time than her Earth 1 equivalent, obviously, and her personality developed on some very different lines. She had kind of an anger management problem, and then she was supposed to, I guess, represent, certain creators' view of militant feminism in those days, or the women's liberation movement. So she was just characterized as being angry, and particularly angry at men much of the time. And as I mentioned earlier, she and Wildcat had kind of a disputatious relationship. But she was a member of the super squad of the Justice Society as well, and eventually became a full member, and she temporarily resigned that membership to go off and join Infinity Inc. when they came on the scene. Next to her, speaking of Infinity Inc., is Northwind. His real name is Norda Cantrell. He's another one who was introduced in All-Star Squadron number 25. He is the godson of Carter Hall and Shira Hall, the Hawkman and Hawkgirl of Earth 2, the biological son of an anthropologist named Fred Cantrell, who is African-American, and a member of a race of bird people living in a hidden city called Phythera in Greenland. So this is Roy Thomas, again, riffing on one of his obscure pet Golden Age stories. He developed the Phytheran culture and mythology pretty extensively. And here we have this kid who is a half-breed and the product of the forbidden love between this human and this bird woman. And he studied under the Hawks. He was sort of a brother to Hector Hall, the biological son of the two Hawks, and eventually he was encouraged to come to humans' world to try and see if he has some place there because he was encountering some prejudice in Phythera. Also, his grandfather, Warla, who was like one of the spiritual leaders of Phythera, told him about some prophecy that he was a part of that involved himself and Hector and bad stuff that was going to be happening down the line, which would come to fruition in Infinity Inc. safely after Crisis had ended. But his big deal was he was half man, half bird, and he could fly. He was a fairly peaceful, easy-going guy, kind of a zen personality. And Roy Thomas played up the fish-out-of-water angle fairly often, but rarely for laughs. He really didn't develop Northwind all that much. Northwind left the series after a time and then came back to take care of that prophecy thing that I mentioned. And then he disappeared again, and was kind of in limbo until Jeff Johns brought him back in a radically altered form in his own run on JSA in the 2000s. Yeah, kind of a waste of a good character. Right below him, we're going to go with Per Degaton for that headshot there, although it's kind of the scowling look on his face and the weird, ugly part of his hair. But it could just as easily have been Johnny Thunder. And to my view, it probably should be because Johnny Thunder doesn't actually appear on this cover. His Thunderbolt does. In fact, right on top of Per Degaton's head, Johnny Thunder's Thunderbolt can be seen, but Johnny Thunder himself is absent. So Per Degaton is an Earth 2 villain. He first appeared in All-Star number 35 in 1947, safely after the end of the war. But there are echoes of Hitler and his worldview to be seen in this character. He's a would-be fascist dictator. He dresses the part, too. He's got kind of his jack boots and his big buttoned-up flap jacket with a big red D on his chest. You can just picture him, Sieg Heiling, wearing that outfit. But he was a lowly lab assistant to Professor Malachi Z, who was a scientist studying time travel. And so he's a time-traveling fascist, a horological Hitler. Several times in the Golden Age, he kills Professor Z and steals his time travel equipment and makes trouble for the Justice Society. But he's always foiled, and time travel is used to undo everything that he's done, and everybody ends up back at square one. The events of the story completely undone. Professor Z is alive again, and Degaton is left sitting there saying, "Gee, Professor Z, I could have swore I just conquered the world." And he says, "Oh, well, stop daydreaming and keep polishing those beakers like a good fellow." And so that's kind of the the repeated shtick with Per Degaton. He was a founding member of the Injustice Society of the World. So somebody thought he could be a name villain in the fledgling DC stable, but eventually he kind of fell by the wayside. But he was revived, and I think he was used in the revived All-Star series in the 70s. But he was definitely used by Roy Thomas in the sometime in All-Star Squadron as well. And as a matter of fact, just about a year before this issue of Crisis saw print, Per Degaton was revealed as the mastermind behind the events of the America versus the JSA miniseries, and he committed suicide at the end of issue number 4. So there's somebody who is technically dead.
Oh, there you go.
That's on this guy, but he's a time traveler. So what does death and continuity? What do either of those concepts mean to him? Then the aforementioned Thunderbolt. You may be thinking that his real name is Yiz, Y-Z, and he's from the Fifth Dimension, but all of that is latter-day retconning, folks. We're talking about Crisis period details here, pre-Crisis continuity, Earth 2 continuity, and he was just a magic genie who was associated with magic that originated on the Asian island nation of Bodnesia. And his young master, Johnny Thunder, was kidnapped as a child because he was the seventh son of a seventh son born on the 7th day of the 7th month of 1917. So some propitious magic stars happening there. So in the Bodnesian astrology, he was destined to be a wielder of magic power and a potential ruler of Bodnesia. So he was kidnapped by Bodnesian agents, bonded to the Thunderbolt, but then he somehow got away and was found and reunited with his parents and grew up just an ordinary American bumpkin in somewhere in New York State. And grew to adulthood. He was kind of a shiftless layup. He couldn't hold a job. Johnny was not the brightest. He was kind of naive. And he just kind of bumbled from one adventure and one career attempt to another, little realizing that whenever he said the word "say you," he could summon this magic thunderbolt, and it would cause his every whim and utterance to become reality. At the beginning, the thunderbolt kept invisible. I mean, we the readers could sometimes see him as like this misty outline of a mischievous little human figure that showed up and played pranks on Johnny or the people around him, and granted his wishes without Johnny realizing it. You know, he assumed that the magic was inside him somehow, but eventually the Thunderbolt gained a personality of his own. He and Johnny came to be on speaking terms, and the Thunderbolt evolved a visual dimension. So at first he was just kind of like an amorphous shape, or like a more literal thunderbolt with a face drawn onto a random point in its circuit. But eventually, the artists settled on the spiky pink, pointy-eared humanoid that appears on the front cover of Crisis number 5. Yeah, so Johnny and his Thunderbolt both first appeared in Flash Comics number 1. Johnny was a founding member of the Justice Society, although he was mainly comic relief in those stories in All-Star. And the Thunderbolt, believe it or not, his real name was not Iz in those days, but Archibald. He had a family life. He had a wife, a lady Thunderbolt named Mildred, and together they had a son, a little baby Thunderbolt named Shaco, who occasionally had adventures with Johnny's adopted human daughter, Peachy Pet Thunder. Yeah, you remember Peachy Pet.
I remember Peachy Pet. I didn't know about the rest of that.
So, yeah, Johnny's. I'm kind of sorry that we have the Thunderbolt instead of Johnny on here. It'd be nice if the two of them were there because they're one of my favorite Golden Age concepts, and it's a great partnership because the Thunderbolt is smarter than Johnny, and yet he's the one taking the orders. So next to him, then, at the very end of this row, we're told by the ICG Crisis Index that is the Ultra Humanite a second time, but this time in the body of film actress Dolores Winters, as seen in Action Comics number 20 and 21. So, enough said about that.
The only character to appear twice, right?
Yeah, I guess. If you're not counting Earth 1 versus Earth 2 equivalents.
Yeah, that picture that I showed you for Neptune Perkins, if you blow it up, you can see she's wearing the gemstone on her forehead there.
There you go.
And that's how you get that's clearly Dolores Winters there.
Right.
Yeah.
And as Winters, I remember she wielded a magic mace called the Hammer of Thor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, final row here.
Home stretch, folks. Nearly 3 hours in.
There we go.
Haven't gotten past the cover.
Earth 1, side, we have Sea Devil, Dane Dorrance being, well, I assume Dane Dorrance.
It would almost have to be. He's
Yeah.
the leader. He's the face of the group.
Right. Being hidden by his face being hidden by the UPC.
Really?
Although you can see, at least on my copy, you can see the visor, but you can also see his breather, his apparatus right there.
The funny thing is, he looks more like a Sea Devil with the UPC symbol blocking him than he does in the pure image. I thought when I looked at the image inside my card cover here, I thought it was like a space character or some kind.
Okay.
But yeah, I knew it was a Sea Devil with the UPC blocking the confusing additional elements.
Next to that, we have Killer Frost, then Arion, Lord of Atlantis, Geoforce, and rounding out with a villain that is splitting the line between Earth 1 and Earth 2. I was trying to think again of when you were talking about the Power Girl, Supergirl thing, it was sort of interesting because, Power Girl came second. So that's sort of rare in that whole Earth 2, Earth 1 thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, well, who else could you put on here? Yes, we've already had a Hawkman, but you could put Hawk Girl and Hawk Woman.
Right.
That could have been one.
That is true, because at that point, Shaira Thal of Earth 1, or Thanagar 1, had already changed her name to Hawkwoman.
But then I was hard-pressed to think of anybody else that could have split that line. So they went to the villain, Lex Luthor. So we go back to Sea Devil. Sea Devils have been around since 1960, again by Mr. Robert Kanigher, artist Russ Heath. This is Dane Dorrance. I don't have a lot about the Sea Devils. The Sea Devils. Were they part of the Forgotten Heroes?
Dane Dorrance was.
Yeah, okay.
But not the rest of the team.
I'm pretty sure that's the only Sea Devil appearance I ever read outside of the Crisis. Like, I read that before the Crisis, and then...
There was a trade at some point, wasn't there?
Maybe, yeah. They're just not a group that I sort of gravitate to, or like that's high on my list to read about.
Well, Pans can probably lend you a few.
There you go. And I'm sure they showed up in Peter David's Aquaman at some point.
Well, at least Dane Dorrance did.
Yeah. All right, next to Dane, we have Killer Frost, one of the Great 15. Originally, the identity of Killer Frost, because there's been a number of different Killer Frosts, first appeared in 1978, but this version most likely appeared in 1984 in Firestorm, created by Jerry Conway, Al Milgrom. One of the Great 15, as I said. And this would be Louise. I think it's Louise. I can't remember her last name now.
Lincoln.
Thank you. Is that this version, or is it the next version that I'm thinking of?
Well, the original was Crystal Frost, wasn't it?
Okay, so then this has to be the next one then.
Well, yeah, just depending on when the first one snuffed it.
Right. And a frequent Firestorm foe. Was his love interest in this series for the longest time because she was put under the power of the psycho pirate. But, that may change as we go on. And what do you see there?
There's an entry here the Killer Frost entry in the original Who's Who mentions both Killer Frosts. Right. So if that's so, we must be on the second one by the time of Crisis. Yeah.
All right, next to her, Arion, Lord of Atlantis. He has been seen in the Crisis since the issue 1. He's also one of the Great 15, created by Paul Kupperberg, Jan Duursma, as far back as 1982. One of DC's sorcery mystic books, mystic characters. First appeared in Warlord, I believe, a Warlord backup tale. And then graduated to his own series that was, I think, still going on at this point or was soon to wrap up. And then, unfortunately, would be sort of shunted into limbo. Would make some appearances here and there, but this is kind of like his hurrah. Next to that, we have Geoforce. You have to really kind of just go like by process of elimination with this mask. Brian Markov, we already sort of mentioned Markovia when we were talking about Sergeant Rock. Also one of the Great 15, a member of the Outsiders, and brother to Terra, who was brought up a couple times, and a being of Earth abilities, gravity, and he could bring up lava, I think, and could move the Earth around. So there is a point where he is used for those abilities in this story. And then we come to Mr. Lex Luthor, who has been around since the Golden Age, but this is the Earth 1 version, who apparently first appeared in Adventure Comics 271 in 1960 alongside Superboy, which is why it gives the delineation of it being Lex Luthor of Earth 1. That was a story where Superboy and Lex Luthor met. I believe that's where we get the famous Lex Luthor mythos of Superboy coming to blow out a fire that is going on in Lex's
Some of the flaming
lab.
chemicals gets on his head.
And then he's bald. His hair falls out. And then he forever becomes his archenemy. They're so hysterical. And that would be by Jerry Siegel and Al Plastino. So this Lex Luthor of Earth 1 being used as one of the members to split between Earth 1 and Earth 2, and hasn't had a direct sort of focus in the Crisis to this point, but will shortly have, a nice little. He'll help to push along a plot that'll come about in issues 9 and 10. So, and that rounds out Earth 1. Hold on, let me make sure the next. So you said all the Great 15 are not present. I counted. There are 2 that are not present. Do you know who they are without looking?
Simon is one.
Yes. Who's the other one?
Ted Cord.
Yeah. Who wouldn't be on this cover.
Right, because he's neither Earth 1 nor Earth 2.
Yeah, although we don't know that just yet in this story.
True. His native Earth is not identified.
Right. So okay, there you go.
All right. So to round out Earth 2, we've got the Earth 2 Luthor there in the middle. And as Peter mentioned, he's the only villain to fall upon the axis of symmetry between the 2 Earths. We've got Jade of Infinity Inc., and just above her there in the gutter is Commander Steel, established by Roy Thomas as an Earth 2 character. We've got Our Man, the Silver Scarab, Plastic Man, somewhat controversially, and the Earth 2 Starman. All right, now the Earth 2 Luthor. I remember when I first got my hands on this issue, it took me a number of years before I figured out who the bottom pair of characters were supposed to be. I saw the bald head, and all I could think of was Metamorpho, but there's no Earth 2 Metamorpho. But I guess the problem was I don't think I knew at that point that Earth 2 Luthor had hair. But he did, and that was something of a retcon, but it was also something of an unretcon. Because, as you probably know, Peter, when Lex Luthor first appeared in comics, he actually had hair. He was shown as somewhat stockily built, but he had most of a full head of red hair. That was all the way back in Action number 20? Well, this will tell me. I didn't happen to write it down, but I've got Who's Who at my side. Number 23. There we go. That was his first appearance, and he was fomenting conflict between a number of European nations. So he was kind of a subversive figure back then. He wasn't an evil businessman. He wasn't so much a mad scientist either. He was just a troublemaker on the international stage. And he kind of swung into full gear to take over Ultra Humanite's former role as the lead villain, because Ultra Humanite had bowed out as of Action number 21. But then Luthor stepped right in. And I think it was thanks to cartoonist Leo Nowak, who I mentioned earlier, co-created Robot Man with Jerry Siegel. He did some of the artwork on, I think it was the Superman Daily. He mistakenly, probably using models for a different character, possibly the Ultra Humanite, possibly just a generic criminal thug who was bald, and accidentally drew Luthor as balder and jowlier than he had been in the past. And it is that depiction that stuck in the stories going forward. So
I wonder if it also was a riff on the sort of prototype for Superman.
The Ultra Humanite. It's the Ultra Humanite was very strongly based on that prototype. I think that was probably intentional by Siegel and Schuster.
Okay.
Just making Ultra Humanite similar to their first Reign of the Superman stories, main character. But yeah, the Luthor thing was just an accident. But it was an accident that happened to stick, and now it's become one of the more iconic figures in all of comics. And all thanks to an art mistake. But in the latter pre-crisis days, the idea was hit upon to go back to the original depiction of Luthor to help differentiate it from the Earth 1 Luthor. It was E. Nelson Bridwell's idea, actually. For a change, it wasn't Roy Thomas. This is once again E. Nelson Bridwell's Earth 2 set Mr. and Mrs. Superman backup series in Superman family. We first saw the red-headed Earth 2 Alexei Luthor, which is his full name, not Alexander, but Alexei. Kind of ties into the idea that he is like a foreign subversive who maybe originated in Europe, or even as far east as the Soviet Union. But yeah, that was Bridwell's idea, and he first appeared in Superman Family number 202, 1980, with his red hair returned to him, and wearing that gray prison jumpsuit. That's what he was wearing in that Superman Family backup story, because he was in prison, and that just kind of became his default costume for the rest of his pre-crisis appearances, including the very significant DC Comics Presents Annual Number 1, which we've talked about in our favorite Cross-Earth stories. It's one of Pants's favorite stories ever. We always talk about it. But it's a team-up between two Supermans, of two Earths, and one good Luthor from Earth 3, and two Luthors from two Earths, and one evil Superman, Ultraman, from Earth 3. So that's really some of the most character development Earth 2 Alexei Luthor got. We learn that he's rather more bloodthirsty and less sympathetic than his Earth 1 counterpart. He's almost pure evil. He's perfectly content to destroy the universes of both Earth, just to commit cosmic genocide on a level that almost approaches the Anti-Monitor, just as long as he gets his revenge on his enemies and he has at least one parallel Earth left where he can just, hang his hat and assume some power. So that's where Earth 2 Luthor proved to be, even Earth 1 Luthor backed away from him and said, wait a minute, buddy, I live on one of those Earths. So if you're more evil than the Earth 1 Lex Luthor, you're doing all right in villain terms. So that is that red-headed guy who occupies the other half of Earth 1 Luthor's head at the bottom of this cover. Next to him, the young lady is Jade. You can't see in this monochromatic picture, but she has green skin and hair. You can copy and paste much of what I said about Obsidian a few rows up about her background. Semi-legitimate daughter just in wedlock of Alan Scott and Rose Canton. And she inherited the Starheart part of her dad's powers, which manifested itself as a power pulse, kind of a big star mark on the palm of one of her hands. And her powers work very much like Alan Scott's, except they generate naturally from within herself. She doesn't need to recharge, and she doesn't need to worry about taking a ring off or losing it or anything like that, because she is her own ring and her own battery. And she was raised by a much nicer foster family than her twin brother Todd was, grew up to be a more level-headed young woman. She is an aspiring actress, but she also found time for superheroics. And so she and twin Obsidian both first appeared in All-Star Squadron number 25 and are founding members of Infinity Inc. Next to her is a founding member of the Justice Society, Rex TikTok Tyler, who is a chemist who invented the miracle drug Miraclo that gave him superhuman strength and speed and all that good stuff for a period of just about exactly 1 hour. And he kept spare pills in the little hourglass-shaped clasp at his neck. So he first appeared in Adventure Comics number 48 in 1940 by writer Ken Fitch and artist Bernard Bailey, who also drew the first Spectre story. And he made his first Silver Age appearance in Justice League number 21 and 22, Crisis on Earth 2. And, of course, that two-part team up with Dr. Fate in Showcase, numbers 55 and 56, that introduced the second Psycho Pirate. So, important Golden Age figure there. Next to him is another founding member of Infinity Inc., Hector Sanders Hall, the Silver Scarab. And he is the biological son of the two Earth 2 Hawks, Carter and Shira Hall. And he was... we would later learn that he was caught up in the same cycle of reincarnation that the two of them were. But again, that's a much later retcon. But Roy Thomas does tell us, and this is slightly after Crisis, that he was, as a consequence of the curse that Hath Set laid on Prince Khufu and Princess Shaira years ago in ancient Egypt, he was born without a soul. And that made him a vessel for an evil entity also known as the Silver Scarab, which probably subconsciously influenced his choice of name. But in the early going, he was a hero through and through, good-hearted kid, athlete. He went to, I can't remember if it was UCLA or UC Santa Barbara, or one of those, was some California school. And his college sweetheart was Lyta Triver, alias Fury, his fellow Infinity Inc. member. He wore an armored costume which was made of nth metal, which allowed him to fly, and also it had solar panels that let him absorb sunlight and channel it into solar energy blasts. So that was his thing. He was kind of just a generic white bread Dudley Do-Right kind of guy, and although he did have something of a temper, and clashed with his fellow Infinitors from time to time. And then finally, the evil in him kind of rose up and bad stuff happened. But that is all well in the future as of August 1985. Then, next to last, the penultimate figure on this cover, we have Plastic Man. And he, of course, was created by cartoonist Jack Cole and first appeared in Police Comics #1 back in 1941, excuse me. And his residency is as mutable as his body. He's kind of stretching and snapping back and forth between different Earths like the rubber band he is. As a Quality Comics character, he should really have been an Earth X native. It really wasn't until Roy Thomas determined that he was an Earth 2 native and placed him there solidly, along with other Quality Comics characters like Phantom Lady during the first year of All-Star Squadron, that he was identified as an Earth 2 character. Prior to that, he was either a Quality Comics character on Earth X, or he made his DC Comics debut after being acquired from Quality 10 years after that deal went through, when he was one of the heroes that Robbie Reed turned into the Dial H for Hero feature in House of Mystery. After that, he had kind of a wacky series of adventures in a short-lived DC humor series, starting in 1966. Then in 1976, that was revived, and he had a series of adventures in 1980 in the back pages of Adventure Comics, which he shared with the Levitz and Ditko created Prince Gavin version of Starman. So those wacky adventures of his, he had a few appearances in Brave and the Bold, which arguably could have been on Earth B. There are some people who put his appearances in the 60s, 70s, and maybe even 1980 on Earth 12, which is the kind of the fan construct home of humor series like Inferior 5, Binky and His Buddies, The Adventures of Jerry Lewis, and so on. Along the way, he did meet a few DC Comics mainstays, not just in those Brave and the Bold stories either. So arguably, he could have been said to have a presence on Earth 1, but as far as Perez is concerned, we're just planting him here on Earth 2 because that's where Roy Thomas had been using him most recently. So there it is. Although, as I've said, you could also put him on Earth B, Earth 12, Earth X, and maybe even Earth 1. But there he is on Earth 2. And finally, you can see because of that cowl with a little bolt-shaped lump over the ears, and I'm sure you could see the fin if on the more complete cover image that Peter's been teasing me with this whole time. That is going to be Ted Knight, the Golden Age Starman. And he first appeared in Adventure Comics #1 in 1941 by Gardner Fox and Jack Burnley. Ran for 5 years in that series. He became a member of the JSA with All-Star #8, same issue in which Golden Age Wonder Woman first appeared, and in which Dr. Midnight also earned his spurs as a member of the JSA. And he was wealthy playboy Ted Knight, who, in the early going, he was not depicted as the inventor of his cosmic rod. His role as scientist was enhanced by later writers. But at first, it was presented, he got it from a scientist named Professor Abraham Davis. And it was a gravity rod at first, later evolved into a cosmic rod. But in any event, it allowed him to fly and fire bursts of stellar energy. Yep, thank you, Peter. You can definitely see that head fin. And he was revived in the Crisis on Earth 2 story in Justice League #21 and 22 also. And he had those 2 issues with Black Canary in Showcase also, which was later interpreted by James Robinson as an affair that Starman had with Black Canary. Yeah, and in All-Star the revived All-Star #58, he was temporarily injured in action, so he kind of passed the cosmic rod torch on to Star Spangled Kid for a bit, giving him superpowers. So that was the establishment of the legastic link between those 2 Golden Age characters there in the 70s. So he had been active on and off since then, but more off and off because I think that we were starting to see more of the scientist Ted Knight even then. just becoming more interested in astronomy, which was kind of a hobby of the wealthy layabout Ted Knight in the 40s. But anyway, that brings us to the end of our long odyssey here across the Earths. Yep, 3 hours, 12 minutes, and counting about the cover of issue number 5.
Oh, my. How are we ever going to do that double-page spread?
Simple. We're just going to name drop, I think.
Yeah.
Well, maybe if we come across a character who's somewhat important and who didn't appear on the cover, then we can go into a little more detail.
Right.
But for the most part, I think we're just going to say that. The hardest part is going to be figuring out in what order to go.
Yeah, just have to go happenstance.
Just to make sure that the readers know which tiny figure in that scene we're talking about, in what order we're going.
Yeah. It's
not as neatly laid out as this cover, nowhere near.
Another quick thing about the cover, it is a nice overview of the DCU at the time, obviously. However, I think what's interesting and what speaks to Marv Wolfman's point is his desire to have a post-DC universe, post-crisis DCU, with a little bit more representation. Because as you see in this cover, there's not a lot of representation. I have down people like John Stewart, Cyborg, Amazing Man, Northwind. You could argue Red Star, Dawnstar, Tsunami, Neptune Perkins, Dr. Light. Hard pressed to find any Hispanic characters, if at all. Ton of aliens, though, that's for sure.
Well, aliens are people too.
Yeah, but I think it does definitely speak to what Marv Wolfman was hoping that the DC universe would become. I think if you did an image like this today, it would be far more representative than what we got then. But that was the point, right? Like, I think that was very much the point of why he wanted to realign things post-crisis. So I thought that was...
Which kind of brings us full circle back to that Legends of the DC Universe Crisis 4.5 special.
Right.
Because that introduced us to Earth D, which was much more what Wolfman had in mind for the post-crisis merged DCU to be like.
Yeah. I think that's everything. There was some feedback for last issue, but I think we should probably wait. I'll give a shout out to Michael Atchison, though, because he sent scans of the timeline from one of the companions that we talked about that we couldn't find an image of, that kind of listed Crisis, the tie-ins, and really kind of put them in some kind of in-story chronology as it was going through. So issues of All-Star Squadron that shipped way later were put in like right after Crisis #1, et cetera, and things like that. The other thing that that timeline did was have brief descriptions. Like for some of the crossovers, it would just say Red Skies, and for some of the other ones, it would have like an appearance by Harbinger or whatever. But it still does not have that World's Finest Comics 314 issue that we mentioned. And my hope is that once we get to the second interlude, much later, that we get to see if those Red Sky chapters are really Red Sky chapters, or do they, mean a little bit more. But that should be fun. So, good.
It always is.
Yeah. So a couple people, like you said, they posted on the forum some feedback, but we'll try to. We read it. We definitely do read it. I think we even responded here and there in it.
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah. So we may not get to it actually on an episode until way later.
So thank you to everyone who left that feedback, and I'll echo Peter's thanks to Mike Atchison for being as generous with us as he always is.
Okay, I'm spent.
Yep.
Shall we merge our faces and as in homage to the cover?
I call Earth 2 again.
There you go.
All right, so thanks, folks, and don't forget to visit thecomicforums.vanillacommunity.com to leave still more feedback about our 3.25 hour discussion of a single, very detailed, but still just a single cover image for issue number 5. We'll get into the content of that issue next time we talk to you, which may be sooner than you think. So until then, keep watching those red skies.